A very good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to our marquee initiative, CNBC TV18 Digital India Vision 8.0 in partnership with Google Workspace. Our theme this year, ladies and gentlemen, is Techade of the Youths. And I'm your host for the evening, Ritika Jhanji Jagtiani. And I sincerely believe that anything that starts with a generous round of applause is bound to be a huge success. Do you agree? Can we have the applause going? Thank you. Now, as part of this campaign, we've embarked on a journey tracing the transformative potential of digitalization in our country. This year, Digital India Vision will focus on India's youths and their pivotal role in nation building by harnessing emerging technologies. Digital India Vision 8.0 aims to bring together industry leaders, policymakers, and young innovators to drive the digital transformation of India. With its focus on technology, entrepreneurship, and social transformation, this campaign hopes to inspire collaborations, raise awareness, and of course, fuel conversations that are very much needed to shape India's growing knowledge economy. An annual initiative by CNBC TV18, this campaign, takes stock of India's digital transformation in critical sectors like healthcare, education, financial services, governance, just to name a few. It is a forum dedicated to celebrating India's digital success stories, discussing key sectors that are utilizing digital technology to scale up their businesses, and deliberating on how technology can be further embedded in every sphere, helping India become a global leader in advanced digital technologies. Now, ladies and gentlemen, over the past 4 weeks, we at CNBC TV18 have had engaging discussions with various stakeholders of Digital India, from policymakers to leaders of corporate India who are driving the digital transformation of our economy on our television, social, and digital platforms. This event, this evening, is a grand culmination to our efforts of bringing a new perspective to India's digital growth story. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let's get it all started by inviting onto the stage Managing Editor of CNBC TV18, Shireen Bhan, to deliver the welcome address and also set the context for the evening.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm welcome to all of you for joining us here for the 8th edition of the Digital India Vision Techade of the Youth. Thank you very much, Ritika, for setting the context of what we are here to do. It is such a pleasure and an honor to see a packed audience here. So thank you very much for taking time out for us on a working day to join us here for what promises to be an evening of engaging, provocative, and inspiring conversations. As we just heard there from Ritika, we've been on this journey with Digital India for the past 8 years, really celebrating the digital transformation that has shaped the country and where we find ourselves today, which is a digitally empowered society and a connected knowledge economy. Ladies and gentlemen, today, India's digital journey stands at a very pivotal juncture. Our focus on technology as well as service delivery, a progressive startup ecosystem, something that CNBC TV18 has nurtured and fostered over the past 20 years with our program Young Turks, so we know a thing or two about that. A massive pool of digital talent and favorable demographics have all come to play and allowed us to emerge as one of the foremost digital economies of the world. But it is also true that today we do rely on technology to solve societal, humanitarian, and sustainability challenges as well, and there are plenty of them, and these are all complex issues that we do need to grapple and contend with. Now, these are issues that we will discuss and deliberate on today as we talk about the challenges that we face, but more importantly, the opportunities that we face as a digital economy as we move forward to take forward our aspiration. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, we are almost in the last lap as we approach the G20 Ministerial, which will kick off here in the capital on the 9th to the 10th of September. And as part of that, in fact, in the run-up, as we speak this evening, there is meetings underway in Bangalore of the task forces that have been entrusted with looking at the Digital India impact as far as transformation for societal change is concerned. In fact, we had a conversation with the G20 Sherpa Amitabh Kant just last evening as a curtain raiser to the Digital India Summit. And what he did say was that the government and all other G20 nations have now arrived at a broad consensus on the broad principles that will drive the governance framework for digital public infrastructure. That is going to be something that India leads the way with as far as our G20 imperatives and the G20 priorities are concerned. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, once again, on behalf of CNBC TV18, thank you very, very much for joining us here this evening. My colleagues and I look forward to engaging with each one of you to delve deeper into the issues that the digital economy is faced with, but more importantly, also celebrate and recognize the many achievements that we've made as a digital nation. So thank you once again for joining us here this evening. I'm going to hand it back to Ritika before we kickstart our conversations.
Thank you, Shireen, for delivering the welcome address and also setting the context for the evening. The launch of Digital India, ladies and gentlemen, talking about it, this has indeed pushed the country towards becoming a digitally empowered, connected knowledge economy. Ladies and gentlemen, let me take this opportunity to now present to you a short AV on the most memorable moments and important milestones that we have crossed in the last 8 years of Digital India mission. Can we have the AV, please?
In 2014, Digital India, a marquee initiative by Government of India, started with 3 key goals: provide quality digital infrastructure to every citizen, all public services digitally on demand, and empower citizens digitally to enable them participate fully in a rapidly digitizing economy and society. Fast forward to today, India's digital revolution has achieved significant milestones, including its leadership in the global real-time payments market and the successful adoption of UPI that has propelled the country towards a cashless economy. India now tops the world ranking in digital payments with 89.5 million transactions recorded in 2022. Here's a snapshot of the state of India's digital economy. In 2023, 692 million internet users in India, with internet penetration at about 48.7%. There were also 467 million social media users, equating to about 32.8% of total population. 1.10 billion cellular mobile connections active in India, equivalent to 77% of the total population. Let's also talk about Aadhaar. Over 135.5 crore residents have been enrolled. More than 13.7 crore users with over 560 crore documents made available on DigiLocker, and more than 1,668 e-services, over 20,197 bill payment services made available through Umang. Over 2.76 crore registered users with MyGov. And CoWIN has provided registration to over 110 crore people and facilitated administration of 220 crore doses of vaccinations. With world business leaders touting the next 10 years to be India's decade, and given the nation's advantageous demographic dividend, the theme for Digital India Vision 8.0 is aptly titled Techade of the Youth. India's demographic advantage, with its median age at about 29 years, provides a strong foundation for tech-savvy youth to harness emerging technologies and fuel innovation across various sectors. At its core, the Digital India mission seeks to harness the power of digital technologies to improve governance, enhance citizen services, and drive inclusive growth across the country. We at CNBC TV18 have been at the forefront in highlighting the success of Digital India mission through our Digital India Vision initiative over the last 5 years, and we will continue to do so in future in order to strive to promote the inherent potential that lies within the country's digital revolution.
So the video highlights the achievements of Digital India Mission in the last 8 years, the milestones, the important moments, and we all would agree that one very, very important achievement has been social transformation that it's brought about, and that's what our first panel of this evening is going to be about. Ladies and gentlemen, India has an expansive, multi-layered and effective social welfare regime that is being further strengthened the increased use of digital technology. From a governance point of view, India is leading the way in showing the world how advanced IT networks can improve service delivery and empower its citizens. The Government of India's mission e-governance coupled with Digital India has brought about a paradigm shift in the social fabric of our country. From smartphones to social media, technology is changing the way we live, we work, and we interact with each other. The transformation is having a profound impact on society and is powering social change in a number of ways. Ladies and gentlemen, our introductory panel discussion is on social transformation driven by technology. To take this discussion forward, may I please invite back on stage Shireen Bhan, Managing Editor, CNBC TV18. And on the very first panel of this evening, ladies and gentlemen, we have some very esteemed guests. So let me quickly invite them onto the stage, starting with Aniket Dogar, co-founder and CEO, Haqdarshak. With a generous round of applause, please welcome founder, director, Digital Empowerment Foundation, Osama Manzar. And we are very glad that we're being joined by Simranpreet Singh Oberoi, co-founder, Punjab Education Collective, for this very panel. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us, making time out of your schedule. Over to you, Shireen.
Thank you very much, Ritika. Ladies and gentlemen, you can do better than that. A big round of applause for these champions of change here who join us here this evening for the very first conversation that we intend to have. And there's a reason why we have these three gentlemen here and why this is our first conversation this evening, because technology is really about social inclusion. It's about social impact. It's about social change. And these three champions of change, through the course of their career and the work that they've been doing, are trying to do exactly that. In fact, if you take a look at what the UN says in its roadmap for digitization, it talks about leaving no one behind, which essentially means leaving no one offline. As we just saw there on that audiovisual, while India has made a lot of strides in our digital journey, we still have just about half the population that has access to the internet. While there are plenty of reasons to be happy and to be satisfied with the progress that we've been made. In fact, I'll throw another number at you. In fact, this is a number that we just got that was released about 10 minutes ago. We've reached 50 crore in terms of the Jan Dhan, the no-frills bank accounts. Today, that number has touched 50 crore. The question now is, what is going to be the account balance? And as per my conversation with the State Bank of India chairman, the average account balance in a Jan Dhan account is between 2,500 to 3,000. So as we pointed out, lots of change has been made, but there is, of course, a distance to cover. Osama, I want to start by talking to you because, ladies and gentlemen, Osama has been doing this for a little over 2 decades now, 22 years to be precise. Osama, what has been the big change that you witnessed, especially in the past 5 years? And more importantly, the distance to be covered now, what do you believe needs to be prioritized? What should the imperatives be?
So, well, I think India must congratulate itself by talking digital all the time. So that's the 5-year, major difference. But more concretely, I would say that before 5 years, our approach to digital was more inclusion, and it's something like 1 + 1 or 1 + 1 is equal to 11. But what has changed in the last 5 years is that now we have no choice but to be digital. And that's very interesting for the people who are in civil society, media, to be concerned that when we reach to a point where we talk only digital, we talk only digital infrastructure, digital life, digital access, then it is also important to know that are we enough connected? Are we meaningfully connected? And impactfully connected? Because then because even the new bill that has come, which has become an act, assumes that we are now living in a connected world, and that's the reason why we are talking about data. That's the huge difference that we have reached.
You know, when you talk about data, and we are talking about data for development, in that context, from your own experience and your own story of taking Digital Empowerment Foundation forward over the past 2 decades now, you know, what's been the impact? How would you quantify the impact that you've made? And more importantly, what's the aspiration from here?
Yeah, I mean, aspiration is now, you know, actually, before coming here, I was sitting with some of the fellows who work in rural India for our centers, which is spread across 2,000 locations. I mean, now people are working in the ground where people are coming and saying, please deposit 200 rupees on this link. And when our people are asking, what is this link? He said, this is the link that we have received on our text, that if you put 200 rupees, you will get 5,000 rupees. So I want to deposit this. What does it mean? It means that it has gone even beyond necessity to even getting caught into cyber
crime and cyber fraud,
where
yes.
you are now going to deposit money in a public space to say that I have got this lottery ticket or whatever, and I want to deposit this. I want to bring to your notice that this is a cultural shift. And this is, I'm talking about women, not even men, who are coming to our centers to do this. But more concretely, just to reply that, you know, it is now our, as a social worker, as the social entrepreneurs, we are now more concerned that who is not connected. We are now more concerned who is the woman or adolescent girl who is not linked to the internet to have a better education. Now we are not counting these numbers that you showed on the screen that we have reached so much. For example, you showed one number that so many transactions we did. Transaction, you can do 1 million transaction in 2 days because you are capable and you have money and so on and so forth. We are concerned who is not able to do transaction. So for example, according to the data, 338 million people did transaction, 99% UPI, right?
Yeah.
On internet. That is, and out of that, only 33% were from rural India. Which calculates that out of 908 million rural population, only 122 million people were able to do transaction.
Yeah.
So I am concerned about the
No, absolutely.
million.
You're giving us a completely different perspective on those numbers as well, and that perspective is crucial, and that perspective is important, and that's why I pointed out that while we've covered a lot of ground and a lot of distance, the journey is going to be long, complex, and arduous. But Aniket, you know, let me address that issue with you. And since we're talking about change, ladies and gentlemen, Aniket, of course, was the India winner of the Social Entrepreneur of the Year award. That is an honor that the World Economic Forum bestows on social entrepreneurs. Osama was part of that, and Aniket has of course represented India and was the winner as well. So Aniket, once again, congratulations. But you know, I want to understand again from you, as Osama pointed out, that there's two ways of looking at the numbers. One, of course, is the glass half full, and the other is what more needs to be done to ensure that we take the glass higher and move the levels higher. In your assessment today, as you look at what's changed, but more importantly, what more needs to be done, what would you prioritize?
So I think one of our learnings at Haqdarshak has been like very similar to what Osama said, in terms of there is a smaller percentage of rural population which is doing larger transactions. So while our number of transactions have increased tremendously, the actual number of unique users is still very low. But I think overall, one of the changes that we did, and we are seeing a large number of changes, whether you talk about banking correspondents, CSC centers, the kind of work a lot of social enterprises do, we have to realize India is an assisted tech country. India is, while we want to develop the best AI out there, it's all should be catered towards those champion agents that are there, that we have invested in, right? We have 100 million, 10 crore self-help group women members. Potentially can be agents, and are working as agents, whether you talk about ASHA workers, Anganwadi workers, so health, education, everywhere they are the champions, or banking correspondent agents who are doing a fantastic job. But a lot of times we talk about technology to the end customer. But that while that platform is built, on the ground it is driven by the agent. So I think one, like again to the point of, you know, while the technologies and the access is increasing tremendously, for us as a organization, I know 5 years back it was very difficult to integrate with the government. Now with Umang there, we've integrated with DigiLocker, Umang, PAN card. So, but we are doing that for the agent. so that that agent can enable more access on the ground. And I think that realization while we are building digital tools is very, very important.
No, and once again, it's important to get that perspective because, you know, in conferences like this, at summits like this, you often hear people throw around buzzwords like AI and ML and so on and so forth. But as you point out, it's very important for us to realize the reality, the ground reality, and customize our digital tools to factor in that reality. But, you know, explain to our audience a little bit about what Hakdarshak does and more importantly, the impact, as I asked Osama, the impact that you believe you've been able to create so far.
So we built an eligibility engine which determines that what are the government schemes and documents you're eligible for. So we were in fact the first engine back in 15, 16 that we had built. But it's, and now with AI and other things, we have improved that. But I think one of the things we did very early on was to realize this assisted tech journey and started training women agents on the ground and build the entire platform for that women agent so that they can help and deliver government schemes and documents. The most interesting thing in the last 2 or 3 years has been the support on the digital aspect of integrations. I think apart from digital, one of the other 2 key buzzwords that we are hearing is digital public infrastructure.
Yes.
And digital goods, which I think UPI has now become the poster boy or poster digital public infrastructure.
Poster girl. Why
poster
not?
Girl.
Why not poster girl?
Poster girl. Poster girl. That's a digital.
Poster child.
Poster child of all the, you know, actual use of such infrastructure, which is going now places all across the globe as well. And I think similar work is what we are also trying to do in government schemes. So that how can, like we widely saw on the AV, that 13 crore plus people are on DigiLocker. So why should a citizen keep applying for their documents again and again?
Yeah.
Why can't you get the document and then open up 24, 25 government schemes that you can get from a caste certificate, income certificate? So I think a lot of innovation happening there, and we are building on that in terms of the platform.
Pop quiz. How many government schemes do you think we have today, ladies and gentlemen? Anyone wants to take a guess? How many government schemes we have today that are operational? You can raise your hands and scream out the number if anybody wants to take a shot at that. Nobody? Yes, sir. How many? 1,000? 3,000. Anybody else wants to take a guess here on how many operational government schemes we have? 57. That's it. That's for you. Okay. Aniket, you want to give them the real number? How many government schemes are up and running as of today?
So there's no, it's one of those numbers where nobody can confirm, but it's about 20,000 in our estimate because 13,500 are registered under the NPCI PMFA system.
Yeah.
They are not unique. There are still schemes which have an overlap, and we are counting state, center, all combined. But that's the universe. 50 plus schemes are eligible for a rural family in India if you screen them. That's one family's eligibility.
Absolutely. So we don't actually have a number, but it could be in the ballpark of 20,000, give or take a few. But that's the number at this point in time. Simranpreet, thanks very much for joining us here. You're the newbie on this panel, so to speak, because your journey really began in 2018, 2019. Now, explain to me what you're hoping to do. And, you know, we're talking about digital public goods and digital public infrastructure, but you're actually working with legacy infrastructure with state governments. You've started with Punjab. Explain to me what you hope to do and what the journey so far has been like.
See, the sad reality is that if you, not just Punjab, like anywhere in the country, you visit a rural government primary school in a rural area and you speak to the teacher, very often you would hear that, you know, the child is with me only for 6-7 hours. The majority of the time is at home. These parents don't care, they don't bother, and what do I do? And if you go and speak to the parents, they would say, our job is to send the child to the school, and we are doing it. This teacher is, you know, usually doesn't come on time and doesn't care and all of that. So now, this is what's happening in most of the schools. Now the reason really is there's a big communication gap, right? Often people are not coming at a common forum and talking about what's the role of a parent, even though I may not be able to read and write, but there's still a lot that I can do for my child. Can you help me do that? And the same thing the teachers can share as well. We are just 2 of us, and there are 100 kids over here. And we not just have to teach, we have to take care of the midday meal, we have to submit so much of data. Now, this happening in an entire state of Punjab, like, you know, 1.3 lakh teachers, 30 lakh students. Now, to do this, you can't do without technology. Now, working at the state level with the education, the bureaucracy, and the entire state machinery, see, what we are hoping to do is essentially one, so the system is able to see itself. Because you can't move towards improving a system without you exactly know what's happening on a day-to-day basis. So right now, like, there's a cadre of teacher mentors who are supposed to support the teachers if they're visiting a school, and all the observations are recorded onto a notebook. So there's like a million papers getting generated every month, and there's no analysis happening. So the first step really is to make sure that the data capturing is happening on a platform so that you can then analyze it and do something about it. So far our journey has been to just ensure exactly this, that there is a cadre of people who plays a very crucial role to ensure teacher motivation, to ensure teachers are supported. And whatever they are observing, whatever they are doing every day on the school needs to get aggregated at a state level so that the leadership exactly knows where to pay attention. Right now they would pay attention, basis some serendipity, some random phone call, but really enabling this data capturing to happen, and then ensuring that decision making is much more informed and is really able to address the real issues on the ground. No. And not just addressing the issues. There's a lot of good work happening as well. The system is running, and we have some fantastic teachers, some fantastic teacher mentors who don't need any recognition, don't need any support. They're just there for the right reasons. They're there for children. Now, how do you amplify the good work which is happening as well? So the system needs to see that as well and have a mechanism to capture all the great work that is happening so that it can come, and then awards can happen basis some real data, and other people in the ecosystem can learn what's going on.
No, you're absolutely right. I think it is important for us to not keep reinventing the wheel, so to speak, and to also be able to diagnose the problem, the challenge, before we actually write out what the prescription should be. And the prescription shouldn't be based on serendipity, as you pointed out, but on real analysis of what is working and what is not working on the ground. I'll come back to you on that in just a second. But let's address this issue of the digital public infrastructure and digital goods. As I pointed out, the meeting currently underway in Bangalore, and at G20, we are hopefully going to present a governance framework as far as digital public infrastructure is concerned, as well as a definition of what digital public infrastructure is. Osama, how critical and how important do you think that is going to be?
I think this is absolutely critical. We cannot envisage 1.4 billion population will have a digital infrastructure at home. So we need certainly digital public infrastructure at various institutional level. For example, what he just said about education. We have 1.4 million schools. That could be a public infrastructure for access to education for teachers. And I also want to insert here that all these school teachers should be asked to do online WhatsApp, location-based attendance system, so that they are in the school. But that's a filler that I'm giving in this discussion. But public infrastructure is extremely important. The second part we have learned is that by working in rural areas, if you work with women, your impact is 4 to 5 times better, without really looking at accountability and responsibility. That is given. And that's very important, that if you link digital infrastructure with women as an expertise, so that our poster girl should not be just UPI, but poster girl is the woman at the institutional level, from ASHA workers to women teachers to the household person. Because you immediately create an environment of domestic level infrastructure through the woman there. It just multiplies in a different world, So that's my, learning and contribution thing. And we have research which shows that if you work with women, you actually multiply impact 5 times. And that's very important. Digital, of course, digital infrastructure we need certainly, but can it also work with the expertise of women and their presence?
Oh, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. I think the multiplier impact of that, not just at an individual level, but a community and a society level, has been well documented and well articulated. But Aniket, just to talk about the digital public infrastructure aspect a little further, but more importantly now, we've got several regulatory changes that have come into place. We've also now got the data protection and privacy bill that's come into place, which puts certain responsibilities as well as an onus on what would be a data fiduciary, what the responsibilities of a data fiduciary will be. How do you see that impacting, for instance, people like you who are working on the ground?
No, absolutely. I feel it will impact very positively because in Europe also we have the GDPR rules, and I think it's high time. Now the largest population in the world has a very strong in-house data privacy laws. I think government's job is to build the guardrails and then let innovation happen. I think even in digital public infrastructure and digital public goods, I feel one misconception that a lot of entrepreneurs have, that digital DPI, DPG or anything open means free. Open doesn't mean free. Open means you're allowing people to build on that and use what you've built and not kind of make it in a closed loop, which will foster more innovation. So what has happened in payments, right? NPCI came in, but then your biggest gainers have been private companies like PhonePe and others who have now, they are the ones who have gotten VC money and actually taken UPI. It's not been the government. Government has provided the infrastructure. It's provided the guardrails, the rules, and then allowed private, social, and other commercial innovation to happen.
On top of that.
On top of that. And I think we really can build in all spheres and spaces. Whether it is, and starting from solving societal problems, because societal problems, if we solve for India, I think that can lead to scale, because the world is acknowledging our innovation in all spaces, because at the scale we are able to solve it, right? Like people have solved for certification at the time of vaccination and others, but not at the scale of 1 billion people. So I think that really augurs well. And another example quickly would be what all of us potentially are doing at airports, which is DigiYatra. Now, right? Like that's also built on essentially the certification and DigiLocker model. And enhancing on DigiLocker, they built an innovation to try out on airports. Now of course, there are a lot of people who will ask the privacy question and others, but I think that's a good example.
Rightfully so.
Rightfully so. But that's a good example of how you can take a use case and potentially further monetize it and scale it. And similar things on, if you look at the security angle, can be looked at even at bus stations and railway stations and multiple other places.
No, you're right. And, I want to take that forward with you, Simranpreet, because as we just heard there, so the government in a way has created the digital pipes, the digital highways, so to speak, and they're allowing the private sector to build on top of that. You're working with legacy physical infrastructure assisted with technology. What role do you believe there is for public-private partnership to really be able to address some of these challenges at population scale?
Right. So when we started and when we asked, one of the officers there, so how do you run this mammoth system? So he said there are 335 WhatsApp groups which are running the entire system, and there is a WhatsApp group.
I do feel India is being run by WhatsApp groups right now.
So, but see, ultimately, like when we were talking about data and what data could do, it's not just for the leadership, right? Data ultimately needs to empower the people who are filling the data, right? If you just go back right to the classroom, if a teacher is doing an assessment, assessment is not always to judge where the student is. Assessment is to judge whether I am doing my job well, whether the child has learned. So just imagine this at a district level, say district which has 1,000, 1,500 schools. Now, if this kind of a data is being discussed at a district level forum, where all the actors who can contribute towards a better public education system and really looking at data together, like it's a teacher, a local, a parent, the IAS officer, the civil society organizations, all of them looking at that data together, and then really seeing where we are right now and what can we do. So it's not just for the state level leadership. I think there's a huge potential to decentralize with data, and districts across the country can really take charge of making public education system the priority.
No, absolutely. And, as I said, it's not just technology for technology's sake. It is trying to address a certain problem. In your case, at this point in time, it's trying to make good quality education accessible to a large population. It's trying to encourage best practices. And I think that's really what you're attempting to do. I want to end by asking each one of you to lay out for us the next 5-year roadmap that you have. And Simranpreet, I'll start by asking you, what do you hope to achieve over the next 5 years with what you're doing today?
So we are very hopeful that in the next 5 years we will be able to encourage at least 10% of the entire people who work at the public education system to really take this agenda of making sure that what matters most, like whether children are learning or not, like that should be at the core of all the discussions, all the decision making is happening basis where our children are. And whatever programs are being introduced, whatever is being decided to be done for 30 lakh children, and I'm talking Punjab's context here, is not because somebody got an idea. It should be basis what this will really lead to, and whether this idea, whether there is buy-in of the mammoth force that we have of 1.3 lakh teachers, and decisions are not just enforced upon. The people who have to implement the decisions are being asked what needs to be done.
Absolutely.
The system needs to, hope is that starts listening more and starts responding to what the people are saying.
It gives participatory governance a whole different meaning when you talk about it like that, and to really use technology to be able to draw people in and get people to work together will have a significant impact. Osama, next 5 years, what's the big target? What's the aspiration?
Yeah, so our top line is that there are 783 districts, so we want to reach at least half of them. They are backward districts, to half of them. We already have 2,000 centers. We are going 3,000 plus in the next 5 years or maybe 3 years, creating digital public access infrastructure at the last mile where there is nothing but this is the hope. So our target is that 759 million who are not connected, 48% who are not connected, and only 75% who are not meaningfully connected or not doing transactions should be doing it in the next 3 to 5 years.
Well, that's an audacious goal, but we certainly hope that you're going to be able to move the needle forward on that. Aniket, the roadmap for you, the aspiration that you've set, and a listing on the social stock exchange anytime soon?
I mean, I think social stock exchange needs its own guardrails and a bunch of things in terms of helping us raise funds. But I think as an organization, we have audacious goals of reaching millions of people. But I think in the social security sector itself, my real hope and vision would be that citizens are not considered as beneficiaries, but as customers. And I feel digital revolution can bring that. Today, when we talk about social security, pensions, insurance, a rural person folds their hands and everyone in the ecosystem is so grateful that that has happened, rather than thinking of it as a service, which is happening in bill payments and others, but not necessarily in social security. Yeah. So I feel with digital infrastructure, and whether it's through assisted or direct, that empowerment at the hand of the customer. And if we stop calling those people beneficiaries and start looking at them as customers, the digital revolution can bring about, open up these 700 plus million customers in the economy, which will result into, expansion of the whole ecosystem.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's a very powerful note to end this conversation on. And I think this shift that you're speaking of not treating this constituency, this very large constituency, as beneficiaries, but as customers, I think that opens up a plethora of opportunities for the private sector, for entrepreneurs like yourself, not just social entrepreneurs, but actually being able to create services and products for paying customers as well. I think it opens up a whole host of opportunities for the ecosystem. Appreciate you joining us here this evening. We wish you the very best of luck. May the force be with you, and may you continue to power through and create positive change and positive impact. Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause for Osama, for Simranpreet, and for Aniket Vyoga today. Thank you so much.
Thank you to all our distinguished panelists for sharing their valuable insights, and thank you, Shireen, for moderating the session. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, let's show our appreciation with a round of applause for their contributions. And now it's time for us to move on to the next power-packed session. Ladies and gentlemen, the social and economic impact of digital transformation is being mirrored by the comprehensive overhaul of the regulatory framework governing digital tools and services with recently introduced legislations, such as the Digital India Bill, Digital Personal Data Protection Bill, and Telecom Bill setting the tone. These policy initiatives promise to reshape the operating landscape for all entities within the digital space, presenting both opportunities and challenges in equal measure. With government leaders championing this overhaul, India aims to position itself as a global leader in tech regulation, aligning its policies with the dynamic digital landscape of the 21st century. And that is what our next panel is all about. That will be discussing the implications and outcomes of these changes. The next panel is titled India's Digital Future, Navigating the Digital Regulatory Landscape. And to take this panel further, ladies and gentlemen, let me quickly invite onto the stage and please welcome, with a round of applause, the moderator for the panel, Ashmit Tejkumar, Deputy Editor, CNBC TV18. Welcome, Ashmit. And please keep the applause going as I welcome the other panelists, our esteemed guests for this panel, starting with Arghya Sen Gupta, Founder and Research Director, Vidhi Center for Legal Policy. We're also very glad we have with us Purushothaman KG, Partner and Head Digital Solutions and Telecommunications Industry Leader, KPMG in India, joining us for this panel. The next guest on the panel is Vinay Godse, CEO, Data Security Council of India. Our next guest on the panel is Lieutenant General Dr. S.P. Kochhar, Director General, Cellular Operators Association of India. And our last guest for the panel is Devendra Dhamle, Vice President Policy at Open Network for Digital Commerce. With that, ladies and gentlemen, the stage is set. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us for this panel and making time out of your schedules. Over to you, Ashmit.
Thank you so much for that. A very good evening to all present in this august gathering, as well as to our panelists for taking out their time and speaking to us. All very distinguished in their respective fields. If they were to write, they could write a book on the subject that we have at hand, which is navigating India's digital regulatory landscape. But I'm told that we just have about 35 minutes. So without wasting any time, let's dive straight in. And let's address some of these issues. We've had a very rich news cycle, so to speak, over the last couple of months. We've been hearing a lot of policy-related regulatory actions being taking place from the government standpoint, which of course has a large-scale implications. So let's dive straight in. Mr. Godse, let me come to you in a way of setting the agenda. Let me get your thoughts to begin with. We're sitting at a time where we have at least 4 pieces of digital legislation that are on their way or is already here. DPDP already here. We're looking at the Digital India Act. We're looking at the Telecom Bill. We're also looking at the Digital Competition Act. So there's a whole host of regulatory legislation that is headed our way. This is coming at a time where we've grown excessively digital in a sense that the government is giving the digital push. We just heard Aniket pointing out there's as many as 20,000 government schemes, so you can imagine the number of beneficiaries there as well. So there's the user element as well. And then, of course, there's the industry perspective on the need for innovation. So just your quick take on, number one, regulation in context of user harm as well as the need for innovation.
Yeah, thank you, Ashmit, for this opportunity to be here. So when we look at the industry, right, we look at definitely the typical industry that we all know about is transaction processing industry, like who had really gone to this digitization process quite early in the game, and because of maybe one is they themselves, but because of the kind of architectural intervention that we brought, Then there is a digital sectors which are digitizing, industry sectors which are digitizing. There are critical sectors which are getting digitized. And also the government sectors, basically, which have been seen, and more importantly now we say tech sector, which is enabling that, basically. In all of this process, what we are seeing is entire transaction processing or economic transaction processing are getting unbundled as well. It's not only the individual user companies in that particular sector, it's also a lot of third-party ecosystems which have been helping you to achieve a lot of digitization goal, right? So what that means is the data then flows all across, right? And somebody's collecting, somebody's processing, somebody's serving, basically, and somebody's sharing that data, basically. So, and in the ecosystem that we believe that this regulatory ecosystem, especially on the privacy side, is very important, because the clear foundation of digitization, the privacy becomes very important component of that foundation, basically. And we have seen in other parts of the globe, and we are now had been trying to see this for last almost 10, 15 years in India. And the kind of digitization that we, as a model that we have produced with the DPI, which is coming in, basically. So having such kind of a regulation which takes care of those kind of key issues and problems, basically, is a interesting way to look at. But at the same time, we know the innovation ecosystem is also very important. And the reality of digitization innovation has kicked in the last 2 years, which is seen in this bill, basically. So the way the principle-based regulation that we talk about is actually the reality that got kicked in terms of looking at what the bill was, 150-page plus kind of a very stringent, nuanced level of the regulation, to 21-page bill, basically. So that's what we see as of now, but we'll during the course of time, we'll talk about more dimension to this.
Mr. Sengupta, let me come to you. You were a part of the original Justice B.N. Sri Krishna committee. So you've been from the Puttaswamy verdict till now the parliament passing the legislation. You've been a part of this. You're at the very heart of this entire conversation. We're talking about the DPDP bill here, passed by the parliament, now vetted by the president as well. Your quick take on the DPDP bill. Mr. Godse pointed out that privacy is something that's really at the heart of this entire conversation. We will finally have a privacy framework. In fact, just a bit of trivia, I'm not sure if everyone is aware, a piece of legislation, on a lighter note, a piece of legislation that deals with privacy has no mention, has no use of the word privacy as a part of that legislation. But jokes aside, just your take, the initial draft that we saw at the hands of the Justice B.N. Sri Krishna committee, we've traveled a fair bit of distance to where we are right now. Big changes, we're talking big changes. Your assessment of the way DPDP Act is currently structured?
So I'm just delighted that we have a bill, which has been the law of the land. And I think that we can all have disagreements in terms of particular provisions, and we can talk about that till the cows come home. But I think the important thing is that there was considerable policy uncertainty about this issue right from the Supreme Court judgment in the Aadhaar case. And let's be honest, there is a reason as to why the word privacy doesn't exist, right? And the reason why privacy doesn't exist is that no government anywhere in the world or no big tech player wants additional privacy regulation. And I can totally see why. I mean, why would you want to unnecessarily have guardrails on yourself? And the reason as to why the data protection bill was mooted in the first place was as a safeguard for Aadhaar. The reason why the data protection bill, I won't say the reason, but it's no coincidence that the Data Protection Act has passed just before the G20 summit. And I think it's a critical piece of legislation to end the policy uncertainty around what are the rules of the game that players in the digital economy have to play by. So I think that's one thing that we should all agree on, that irrespective of the nuances of the bill, it's going to be a work in progress. But I think we should all be happy about the fact that we have a bill. And the second point that's critical in this regard is the fact that if we look at the content of the bill, I think it has the beginnings of what I think is a third way of doing data protection or largely digital economy regulation. And by that, I mean that, one, this is not the American laissez-faire style where everything is left to the individual. It's certainly not the Chinese way in terms of having state control over everything. But it is an effort.
It's not the European way either. I mean,
the European way, I think it's certainly not. But I think we moved a long way away from that. But I think that why I say it has the beginnings of a third way is because of the fact that I think this is looking at data protection in a way in which it can empower citizens. So if I were to give you a very simple example, there is this idea in the bill of a consent manager, right? Because as individuals today, we don't read these long privacy forms where before we click I agree and we download Uber on our phones. All we want to do is get a taxi very quickly, right? And I'm a lawyer, I've never read those forms till I was part of this committee, okay, let me assure you. And the point is that, so there could be a potential business model here, as Apple is showing, where everywhere you see it's privacy by design. There is a potential business model here of an intermediary which comes in and is showing you where is your data going, who is Uber sharing your data with, where is it keeping its data, can we have a data trust score for Uber. So I think these are the beginnings of an approach towards data protection that is based on empowering the individual to take autonomous decisions for herself.
So, if I can just ask a supplementary question, if you're calling it a work in progress, then is it safe to assume that there are concerns that you have with respect to the application and the enforcement of the bill? Because there are concerns, we've seen plenty of conversation, whether that's independence of the data protection board, whether it's provision for exemptions for the government, whether it's dilution of the RTI. There are a number of concerns and criticisms we've heard. Would you share those concerns?
Yeah, I absolutely share those concerns, particularly in relation to the last sentence of the bill. I think there's a little bit of the kicker that's right at the end in terms of the fact that it completely denudes the Right to Information Act. I think there are better balances possible between privacy and information than the one that this bill has drawn. It will no doubt be in court, which is why I said that this is certainly not the last word. As far as government is concerned, I think this is an issue that we have to handle delicately, because let's realize one thing, that there is no privacy regulation worth the name on government today. The IT rules, as the reasonable security practices rules, do not have government in the first place, let alone exempting them. So we have gone one step further. And my journey of working in the legislative space for the last decade or so has made me realize that this is all going to be about incremental wins. It's not going to be that, your data protection legislation will also become a surveillance reform legislation. It doesn't work that way. Yes, it's ideal if the government put some guardrails for itself and said that, okay, we will do surveillance responsibly. But that's why I said it's a work in progress. We certainly need more safeguards. There's no doubt. I mean, there are some provisions in the bill which exempts government from security safeguards. Like, why should government be exempted from security safeguards? Surely the government has as much responsibility to keep data secure as any other person does. So, there are some things in the bill that require changing, but the life of any legislation is a long one. It's only just started. And I think over time, as in these things will get ironed out.
Interesting. Mr. Purushottamam, let me come to you. You've been engaging at length with these pieces of legislation. Just your take on where things stand with respect to the industry. And I'll ask you this in context of some of the conversations that we've had with senior government leadership. What they tell us is that in their conversations with digital ministers in Europe, for them, the conversation has been very different when you talk about GDPR. So GDPR has been a piece of legislation which, though widely acclaimed, has not really led to that innovation sandbox, innovation ecosystem that European leaders were hoping for. This is, of course, the version that we're getting from government leadership. Will DPDP be the solution for us? Mr. Sengupta was pointing out there's the American way, the Chinese way, we've learned of the European way. Is this a new Indian way that will perhaps yield the results, at least from an industry perspective?
Thanks, Ashmit. And let me start off by first saying and complimenting that this particular bill is very different from how GDPR itself has been conceptualized and rolled out from various perspectives. One is, number one is when it comes to ownership, it does give ownership not only to the individual who is going to give the consent, the fiduciary responsibility of the enterprise that's collecting the consent, but at the same time, the difference that it has created as compared to GDPR is that it has also allowed or differentiated, it has looked at India as an ecosystem which actually generates the largest amount of data content and how that content is going to be shared with a wider community. So the concept of whitelisting versus blacklisting is a very different regulation from how GDPR operates. GDPR operates on how different entities, different countries will be whitelisted as part of the entire effort to share data, whereas the regulation in India is actually talking about blacklisting, which is more open and on a selective basis. As per the regulation of the government, you allow more selective sharing. The second important thing I would say is when it comes to India and how this particular regulation difference. India actually started off a few years back by an initiative of the telecom regulation trying to compare with the European Communication Code. So the European Communication Code, as all of us may know, focuses on digital services, and that is now becoming the basis of actually driving regulations in every country in Europe beyond GDPR. Okay, and how that is being adopted in India is the concept that we spoke about some time back on consent management, and some of these operating models are getting redefined, and there is expected to be a new set of entities that will actually help in regulating this model, because you have more than the number of SMEs and MSME enterprises are going to be very different, and you need a different model for doing it. So just to conclude on your question, it is an Indian way of actually dealing with the entire data protection challenge, and it is in favor of enterprises that are trying to regulate, at the same time safeguard the information that they collect from customers.
Well, having said that, would you agree with Mr. Sengupta that perhaps this is a work in progress and that there is a greater expectation from the industry to perhaps fine-tune?
It is, in fact, yes, the operating guidelines. The operating guidelines that will actually define a lot of things that Sargya said will define the way it is going to get implemented. Starting with even how to, the concept of, there's no concept of deemed consent in the current regulation. It is now legitimate use. How is that going to get operationalized is going to be very interesting to be seen in the Indian context. And that will require obviously a more better operating way of actually dealing with.
Indeed, there are a lot of aspects, whether that's about the DPB, whether that's countries that will be blacklisted, whether it's these issues. So a lot of rule-making power available for the government, which in fact was a subject of another conversation altogether. But we've been talking about the DPDP. Let's also get Lieutenant General Dr. Kochhar in on this conversation. Dr. Kochhar, while data protection privacy, it was a 6-year effort. We're finally here. It's an act now. We have a legislative framework. While that is there, there's also a lot of action in the space in which you operate, telecom bill. There's a wide amount of consultation, a lot of conversations going on about the nature of regulation going forward. Just your take, again, the overarching umbrella remains the same, which is regulation in light of innovation as well as user harm and user concerns. Keeping that in mind, the most specific question I want to ask is, given that we've seen technology evolve to a point where the days of communication and the words and the thoughts that would come up of an SMS or a phone call is no longer the only means of communication. The word itself has changed. The dynamics have changed. Keeping that in mind, what would your perhaps suggestions or your assessment be of the draft of the telecom bill that got put out in how it treats traditional legacy telecom players versus larger tech players that operate in this space?
Thanks for the question. I must congratulate the government for coming out with the draft. I don't know what is going to finally come out. But the draft was well formulated. We had certain concerns which we highlighted to the government. One of the major concerns was an emerging element called OTT, which rides on telecom. So they had made a mention of OTT communication services. But they did not define what OTT communication means. So that is something that we had asked the government, please define this. Otherwise, there will be ambiguity all around. So that is one thing which should happen. Now, between DPD and the telecom bill, one thing is emerging as a common thing. India has consciously taken a decision of going into the zero trust syndrome. Earlier, it was a geofenced syndrome. Whitelisting or blacklisting doesn't matter. What matters is you trust nobody, and those you trust, you whitelist. This has happened with telecom also, and this is now happening with the data protection bill also. This is the right way to go about in the changing world order, and that is something that we are seeing, and we'll see more of it as time progresses. As far as your pointed reference to other entities mentioned in the telecom bill, you see, while SMSs, etc., may not be the vogue of the day, but networks are becoming essential. And without networks, you cannot function at all. And this was proven very well in COVID. And going forward, whether you have OTT or you have any other service, without network, they're just a service, they'll cease to function. And therefore, the government has to see on a collaborative approach. You know, I'll give you a practical example to explain what I'm trying to say. Now, we are implementing 5G. If you go into a rural area, even if the telcos decide to lay out networks into rural area, what are the people going to do with 5G there? Firstly. Secondly, even if the applications get developed, can they afford a 5G device? Right? So telcos do not have a business case of going there. But OTT people have. Because OTT is an emerging field which will be lapped up by rural or urban population. But OTT again cannot reach there without networks. So therefore, our demand is from the telecom sector that anybody who uses our networks should also contribute towards creating those networks of the requisite order. That is why we asked for definition of telecom services, and we said that they should also come under the ambit of regulation, right? They should also share the burden of cost that the network providers have to incur. In the similar vein, there are other tools that we use, like for example, spectrum. Now, if you're going into 5G, if you don't roll out robust networks, we will not be able to give 5G services of the order that the public demands. And for that, we require 2 gigahertz of spectrum. We don't have that. Indian conditions don't permit that. So our demand was that give us 6 gigahertz to make up for the deficiency so that we can roll out proper 5G services. That is a writing on the wall that we require that. But there are other people who say that give it to us for free. The government has to arbitrate that in the Indian context, not in the US context or European context or Southeast Asian context, because the conditions are different. The spectrum availability is different. So the point that should come out in the telecom bill is adaptability and flexibility to the Indian system. And an Indian act should come out, and it should not be a copy and paste act. The indications are it will be like that.
Interesting. Yes.
To what General Kochhar said on the bill itself, on innovation specifically, we should complement the draft bill at least, which has a provision for innovation through introducing regulatory sandboxes and using that for R&D, and then bringing in startups for actually working on the use cases that Sir spoke about, which will drive implementation at a ground root level. I think that's an important initiative. And for that, how will it be facilitated? That will be through the TDF, the USOF converted to TDF, which is also a good provision to be looked for.
Interesting. Mr. Damle, let's also get you in on this conversation. We've been talking about the DPDP, now the Act. It's the Act now. Another area, piece of legislation which will operate in the space in which you work, which is the Digital Competition Act. There's a lot of work and effort being put in that direction. There is also a lot of conversation from civil society questioning the very need for a digital competition. Is the current framework insufficient? Does the competition legislation, the way it stands, not competent to deal with digital entities, and therefore the need for a digital competition bill? Your take on that?
Thanks for having me. And great question. And this is something that we were discussing while we were waiting for the panel to start as well. And to steal a line from Margot, right now, if you think about it, everything is digital. So really, you have to cast what you were thinking of as market failures in the past into what it looks like in a digital space now, right? Fundamentally, things haven't changed. We're worried about monopolies. We're worried about information asymmetry. We're worried about negative externalities and so on. So really, I think I don't have, just to be upfront, I don't have a view on whether we need a fresh act or not. Mm-hmm. But no one can dispute the fact that there are new forms of concerns around anti-competitive behavior that do need to be addressed somewhere. Now, whether that happens through an amendment to the existing act or whether it happens through an entirely new legislation, I don't have a position on. But just to take one example, typically predatory pricing has been thought of as something that a major dominant player uses to push out smaller players. But we have seen emergent situations where somebody is using cash burn to generate network effects in highly networked industries or highly networked sectors to get that network effect and then create an oligopoly or monopoly. Now, that doesn't fit your traditional definition of predatory pricing, but that is a concern, right? Because you do want there to be competition and a thriving economy in any sector. So I feel there is something to be thought about there. We do need to ponder deeply about how our concerns around competition are going to be addressed in an ever more digitizing economy. What I also want to bring in at this stage is that regulation is one piece of the puzzle, and some people, the previous panel also partially touched upon this, is there are many different approaches that people can take to address competition concerns themselves, right? Sure. And one of them is the entity that I, in fact, work for, ONDC. Although necessarily we didn't originate from the idea of having to tackle competition in e-commerce, it was more to do with access and digitizing more businesses. But the world over, we do see some movement towards building digital public goods and digital public infrastructure to make e-commerce more competitive. And there I feel some of the existing legislation, or rather the DPDP bill, for example, is quite timely because it creates this whole mechanism for consent managers, which is a necessity when you're saying that you want to create infrastructure on which you expect people to build things, not the government building things. So I feel that is a good thing. On the competition piece, I feel a fresh law, like I said, I don't have a view, but we do need to start thinking about tackling these issues beyond just laws. There are many different ways of going about to achieve the same outcome.
Interesting, but speaking of laws, Mr. Sengupta, let me come to you. We're at a time, we're looking at very many overlapping legislation. So there are overlapping elements between the Digital Competition Act, the Competition Act, the Consumer Protection Act. There are also overlaps between the DPDP bill as well as the IT Act. We don't quite have a framework on what the Digital India Act may look like. Just a word from you in terms of this, when we have this overlap in regulatory overlaps, are we heading to a situation where there perhaps might be a case for over-regulation and therefore risking innovation?
Yeah, I think first we need to understand as to why these overlaps happen, and there's a really pedantic reason for that, is because of the fact that most of these, the nodal ministries for each of these things is different. So whereas DPDP and the Digital India is handled by the Ministry of Electronics and IT, competition is handled by the Ministry of Corporate Affairs and the Competition Commission, and the Telecom Bill is handled by the Department of Telecom. So, this is a larger problem of the way in which we see governance in silos, and we need to start thinking about the horizontals, because if we don't think about the horizontals, your point is absolutely correct that even if we don't have overlapping regulation, and even if these are in different areas, because some interministerial consultation will take care of that, the fact is that a regulated entity will have to go to 3 different regulators that will be set up by these 3 different bodies because they are reporting to 3 different ministries that's paying for them, right? So at the end of the day, what I'm hoping is that the DPDP bill has been the first of the blocks. There's a delightfully vague composition of the Data Protection Board, and I'm hoping that over time that this one board, as in, can become the single entity that can look at large amounts of the digital ecosystem. And I think that's the kind of, another reason as to why it's a work in progress, is that I think that's the convergence that we'll head towards. Because what is this, why this sudden flurry of regulation? This is essentially the old school nation state, right? Because what can countries do as in this age where, the combined market cap of Google, Microsoft and Apple is $2 trillion or above $2 trillion, which is more than the GDP of 119 countries. So what can countries do? Countries can only regulate. Now that's the old way in which we operate. The new way is what Devendra was talking about, which is that, and what we were talking about in the previous session, is that can countries build, can the state and the governments build those fundamental layers of digital public goods on which the private sector can come in? And I think that's a different way of thinking about the competition issue. And in my view, that really is the future. So while we will continue to see some of this overlapping regulation, I think that soon this conversation will be far more about digital public infrastructure governance and regulations for digital public infrastructure. And a last point is that, if you allow me, which is that I think there is a fundamental shift away from seeing regulation through silos, which is how we used to see them. You know, this ministry, this entity is going to be regulated in this manner, to seeing it as a network, and various parts of the network need to be thought of differently.
Dr. Kochhar, let me take that same question across to you. How do we steer clear of over-regulation? Talking about telcos, you'll be answerable to a TRAI. There's a DPB now. Under the Digital India Act, there will be another overarching digital regulator. How do we steer clear of this over-regulation?
I hope we don't get more regulators, because we are already over-regulated, and I think technology should dictate what should be regulation. Today, what is happening is legacy is dictating what is regulation. If you, for example, where I worked, if you have DOT, there should be a regulator for telecom. If you are in MIT, there should be a regulator for MIT. Whereas technology does not distinguish between telecom and IT. So therefore, the regulators have to be reconstructed, and maybe they have to converge somewhere. And that has to be decided by the prevailing technology and not by legacy policies. Similarly, in the same vein, I would say that even policymakers need to be converged. Today, you have different policies emerging from one ministry, another set of policies emerging from another ministry, which overlap. Now, whom do you obey? That becomes a big issue, right? Especially when there is converged technology all around. So I think this has to be looked at as soon as possible by the government. And both policy frameworks which are existing today, as well as regulatory frameworks which are existing, need to converge.
One quick suggestion on that is that we need to start thinking about a chief technology officer for India in the Prime Minister's office. That is one way in which it can converge.
I think that's a good suggestion. We'll take that across to the MOS, Mr. Rajiv Chandrasekhar, who's joining us later this evening. We're running out of time, Mr. Godse. Let me come to you. One key area where we are looking at in terms of regulation is AI. That is, of course, the buzzword. Everybody's talking about it. With that being the buzzword, the version that we had received from, again, senior government leadership figures is that the DIA, when it comes out, it will have some kind of algorithmic accountability. Is that a safe path to tread down? Because we're treading into the domain of commercially sensitive information. Will companies be willing to open up their algorithmic playbooks to regulation by the government? That's an interesting question. So just your quick thoughts on that.
Yeah, so as of now, I think we are holding ourselves back, right? So DPDP Act, if you look at, it allows you, it doesn't apply, the expectation of privacy doesn't apply on a publicly available data. That's one thing. In fact, profiling also, even if it is here in other parts of the globe, basically. Right? So currently, I think bringing regulation, especially for the AI and the generative AI paradigm, may be very early at this point of time, and that's why we are dealing this very cautiously, so that if you start doing something, it will be something like language that people talk about. In early days of the language, if you would have started regulating through grammar rules, you would have not progressed to this level, basically. So that's the reality, and that's why the DPDP Act do reflect on this, that let's wait for some time, let's understand this better, and then probably go for seeing what are the different things that can be brought together. Certainly SRO, self-regulatory mechanism, is definitely one important part, and people are committing themselves. The kind of LLM, the responses it used to throw 3 months back, and now the way responses are coming, there's a lot of those kind of realities are coming there. They are becoming more responsible, and I think at this point in time, as a country, we are keeping ourselves at a standby to see what is happening, and not really latching on regulating in the early stage of this development.
Mr. Purushottamam, same question to you. Would you agree that perhaps it's time best to perhaps wait and watch before arriving at some form of ex-ante regulations, ex-ante laws governing AI as well as digital India?
So I think undoubtedly there has to be some guidelines around ethics around the AI, and that I don't think it is going to get self-regulated, but there will have to be an overarching guidelines that will have to come in place to make AI more responsible, and there are precedents available which can provide those guidelines for sure. But yes, it's to make it ex-ante is something that is not recommended.
Interesting. We're completely out of time. I'll just give 30 seconds to each of our panelists, just for closing comments in terms of thoughts and suggestions and recommendations on the question of regulation that they would put across to the government. Mr. Damli, we'll begin with you first.
Thank you. One thing I think we didn't touch upon enough in the panel, and something to again take back to, is we need to, or the government rather needs to embrace self-regulation a little bit more, because as we move towards the frontier of cutting-edge technology, things get so sophisticated and complex, especially in highly networked systems. You need to have the participants in the network themselves participate in the governance. And this is something that we have operationalized, for example, in the ONDC network. We have the digital rails, of course, but there's also a governance process and a governance body which is composed of people who are part of the network. Then that makes everybody then has a stake in making sure that the whole thing works well. And I think we need to figure out how to do that for the digital economy at large, because one single government is not going to be able to handle it on its own.
Interesting. Dr. Kochar?
So I'll take it on from where he left. You see, we've been praising the acts. Good. But the devil lies in the details, and the details come in the rules, right? So what we will see is how the rules pan out, and that is where I feel that it should be participative. And rules should not be framed only by the government. They should invite the industry to sit with them and frame the rules so that what we get at the end of the day is something which is acceptable both to the government as well as to the industry.
The devil lies in the detail, Dr. Gotse. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, so data, right? There are various dimensions. There is a societal dimension like access, the inclusion, and then there is a innovation, there is the enablement, there is a public good, there is a competition. So data is where there are a lot of conflicting interests comes together, right? And understanding nuances of it from the regulation perspective and the possibilities perspective is very important, and it's not easy task, and we are still at early stage of understanding this and looking at it, and that's why the cautious approach to regulation is very important at this point.
Mr. Purushottamam, you sit at a confluence of a number of industries all going digital at the same time. Your quick thoughts, your recommendations to the government.
In fact, Mr. Sengupta referred to a CTO recommendation. I would say that these set of regulations are like a legal tech architecture, and they have to be interoperable. And the CTO will have to ensure that they are interoperable. But at a design level, from our discussions with the various forms of government, is to make it interoperable. You know, how well that is being done is very, very critical. I would also say that when it comes to governance, there is currently no framework, although it is envisaged in one of the acts, the Digital India Act, to bring in data governance as a framework into it. That will help in bringing that interoperability between the different guidelines. So I think introducing that very quickly will help.
Mr. Sengupta, you've already given an interesting suggestion, a CTO for the Prime Minister. So just asking the same question to you, if there's one thing that you would do differently.
I think it's time for India to lead and not follow when it comes to digital governance. And we are all guilty of this, even in the Sri Krishna committee, that we look at what's happening elsewhere in the world and then try to copy and adapt. And as we found from the previous session with both Aniket and Simranpreet, as in, who are you regulating for? You're regulating for that ASHA worker, as in who's the most digitally savvy person in that village who's helping everybody else regulate. So one, lead and not follow. Two, what Dr. Kochar said, I completely second, is that consult widely and make sure it is participatory and accepted. And three, I'll reiterate that again, is that I do think that we need a chief technology officer for India.
Well, we have a whole host of suggestions, and just a few minutes from now, we'll also have the MOS, Mr. Rajiv Chandrasekhar, with us. We'll hope to let these suggestions travel to him, and let's see his feedback on that. But on that note, I'm being told we're completely out of time. I'd like to thank all of our panelists for sharing their time and perspective. It's been an engaging conversation, and we hope this is not the last of it, and we'll carry this forward again as we see these multiple legislation come into action. Thank you once again.
Thank you to all the panelists for such an engaging session, for shedding light on India's digital future and on the intricacies of navigating the digital regulatory landscape. Thank you so much, Ashpit, for moderating the panel. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the most exciting part of this evening. Just in a few minutes from now, in front of you will be someone very talented, very innovative, and very young. This young student has been nurtured in Atal Tinkering Labs, an initiative of Atal Innovation Mission of the Government of India. I'm sure you all know about this initiative, which is a flagship initiative to nurture an innovative mindset amongst high school students across the country. In these labs across the country, it's schools who identify community problems of their choice, and then they go on to develop innovative solutions in the form of working prototypes. This helps in fostering curiosity, creativity, imagination in young minds, and inculcates skills like having design mindset, computational thinking, adaptive learning, physical computing, and a whole lot more. And now I see as the stage is being set by the technical crew. All right, so before I invite the young student onto the stage, I must tell you that your applause will act as a motivational bonus for their work. So please be very, very generous as I invite onto the stage the young student Puranjay Agarwal from Delhi Public School, Greater Faridabad. All the best, Puranjay.
Thank you, ma'am. Good evening, everyone. Myself, Puranjay Agarwal from Delhi Public School, Greater Faridabad. And today I am here with my product, Radiant Rims. So before starting, let's go over the table of contents. You can read it here. Okay. So our company's mission is very simple. Elevating solar energy solution by increasing efficiency and accessibility. But what made us do this? There are two major problems that come into account here. Number one, that very few people have installed solar panels in their homes. But why? Because the efficiency is low, the cost is high, and yet their energy needs aren't met. Number two, that India's goal for 2022 was to produce 175 gigawatts of solar energy, but they were only able to produce 64 gigawatts. And their target for 2030 is to produce 280 gigawatts. So, for this, they would need approximately 700 million panels. The number in itself seems impossible. But with our innovation, Radiant Rims, this number is cut down by 70% and comes down to just 215 million panels. Now, as for the product features, we are using LDR sensors to adjust the angle of solar panel according to the direction of the sun. And we are also using concave mirrors that reflect the light of the sun onto the solar panel. And last, the AI cleaning module that cleans the panel after every 2 days. Now, let's see the working of our project. When the sun will rise from the east, the panel will turn towards its direction. At noon, it will come in the middle, and then at evening, it will again turn towards the direction. This process will be repeated for one more day, and then the AI part will come into play. If the AI detects that there are bird droppings on the surface, it will wipe it 2 times. Since after 2-day period, the bird droppings are dry and can be cleaned off with just a little wipe. If the AI detects that there is dust on solar panel, then it will give it a wet wash. It will clean the surface once, then turn on the pump and then clean it again. But if the AI detects that solar panel is already clean, then it will just switch on an LED indicating that the panels are already clean. Now, let's talk about the cost involved. We offer 2 products, the Radiant Rims Complete product that starts from 65,000 rupees and the Rims Boost Kit that starts from 25,000 rupees and gives you just the additional features. As for our target market, it was $38 billion in 2022 in India and is anticipated to grow up to $238 billion at 2030, and we plan to become the big bull of it. But it's not possible without the future plans. So for the next 6 months, we are dedicated in building a real-life, fully functional model. 6 to 12 months, we will do marketing campaigns and awareness workshops. And the next 2 years, we will achieve 100+ sales and increase this number by each passing year. Now, these are some in-depth specifications that you can take a quick glance at it of our real-life model or take a picture. As for the impact we will make on the country and all over the world, we will increase our country's production by 2.75 times. We will lower the carbon footprint by 57%. We will also help 100+ Indian solar firms to achieve the 2030 solar target. Moreover, we'll be helping 100 million plus households. So this was my presentation for today, and thanks a lot for your time, everyone. Thank you.
So that was a young innovator, Puranjay, from Delhi Public School, Greater Faridabad. Puranjay, your creativity was super inspiring. Keep dreaming big. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we're moving on. Up next, generative AI is revolutionizing the way we approach problem solving and creativity with far-reaching implications across industries. Now, as we prepare for this transformation, it's crucial to adapt our skills, our education, our mindset to stay relevant in the age of AI. Whether based on ML or foundation models, the more customized your AI models are to those priorities, the better you will be able to serve your customers and deliver real business value. Given how much AI has already helped business achieve, there is immense pressure to act now and now, or the risk of falling behind. So up next, we have a very special address lined up for you, titled Thriving in the New Era of Work with Generative AI. Ladies and gentlemen, with a round of applause, please join me in welcoming onto the stage Subram Natarajan, Director, Custom Engineering, Google Cloud.
Wow, what an exciting time to be in tech. The confluence of generative AI as a technology and the interesting and complex problems that we all bring together that generative AI solves and addresses for us is an immensely exciting time to be in, an area to be in. Good evening, everyone. My name is Subram Natarajan. I lead the customer engineering function for Google Cloud. The next 10 minutes, my endeavor is to take you through how we can leverage generative AI as a technology in all our lives, particularly focusing on the productivity tools we call as Google Workspace. Gmail, Google Docs, Sheets, Chart, and Google Meet. So you have all of these functions there to really help you bring all of the productivity-related problems that you used to have, little bit of rough corners here and there, we would be able to address them very, very easily. Now, I want to set the context a little bit by taking you back a little bit in time. The concept of AI is not new to us. We have been living in this for nearly, I would say, 6, 7, 8 years, perhaps. You might have used some of these functions sort of unknowingly the spell check function, type ahead function in mails and stuff like that has always been there. But what happened is, along the way, we realized that in order to really solve something that is of broader scope, deeper impact, we needed to have a larger language models, or models that are large in size. That's when our researchers went back to the drawing board and started creating something really new. And out of which was born the neural network, a new neural network called transformers. Even today, that seminal work powers most of the generative AI technologies that you see in your life today. Ever since the generative AI transformers got created, we have a lot of large language models that got created addressing many, many problems that we think of today. Whether it is to do with healthcare, life sciences, or core financial services related problems, you have pretty much everywhere generative AI right in a surface of interaction. Google today has close to about 3,000 PhDs focusing only on AI, 7,000 publications. The reason I am mentioning this is not an overnight affair. We took on this journey quite a number of years ago. And we have been very responsible about going and producing things, integrating these generative AI technology into our workspace in a very responsible way, making sure all the security guardrails and controls are put in. A little bit more on the history. Back when 2018, the transformers got created, along with it, we started creating large language models that address various problems. Today, we have the general purpose model called Palm 2, which pretty much is integrated across all of our Google Workspace properties. What is generative AI? Think of it this way. Suppose you have somebody who knows about, who understands entire of encyclopedia in one go, and you are able to interact with this person in many, many ways. Text, image, speech, audio, video, and that person responds in similar way. And that's what generative AI large language model is all about. Palm 2 is one such model where you can have an engagement with that model depending on whichever products that you're going through and accessing that. And of course, it produces those kind of responses in multimodal way. Today, while we talk about general purpose model, there are a lot of other variants as well. If you want to have focused models that are specific to life sciences, there is MedPalm available. If it's cybersecurity, there is cybersecurity-based SecPalm that is available. Such kind of innovations allow you to have your own experts sitting right by you, addressing some of the core problems that you face in your premise. Let's talk a little bit about how it differs from AI. Today, AI in general mimics human being and human brain. Generative AI, on the other hand, dips into the knowledge base, understands a plethora of data, understands the knowledge or data that it was trained on, and builds that entire knowledge base to generate new content. And that's the exciting part about Gen AI. And when earlier panels were talking about how the whole technology is improving and driving towards efficiency, economic growth, and very engaging and differentiated customer service, this is precisely it. And let's talk a little bit about how this is done. Today, I do not know how many of you are accessing or using Gmail as a tool for communication. And I can tell you, and you might have experienced this as well, close to about 99.9% of all phishing and spam are removed automatically without even you knowing about it. That's because we have the security controls built in. If you are on a G Meet or Google Meet, the conference service that we have, the noise cancelling feature is built in already as part of that, and you become implicit beneficiaries of it. The difference is as follows. What used to be the AI as a feature that used to be underneath a couple of surfaces below, now it is risen up. It is there in our faces, right? That's what you see in many, over the timeline we have introduced these things. The fundamental principle is we don't believe in a technology that gets bolted onto a platform. This is an integral part of every Google Workspace offering that we have, whether it is mail, charts, docs, slides, etc. Think about it this way. You go to Slide and you say, well, I want to build a catalog, or I want to build a presentation for spring campaign. By giving that prompt, it automatically goes and dips into its knowledge base, starts putting together the images that are relevant for your prompt, and it knows the intention and builds the entire content for you to work on. And then, of course, you can go on and modify it, whether it is, oh, I don't like this green color in the background, change it to blue. Within a few seconds, that happens. Oh, I don't like this animal, put giraffe there in front of an Eiffel Tower. It can happen. However fictitious it may be, it allows you to stoke your creative capability to drive home the point. And you could do that today, right, by putting few prompts here and there across all of Google Workspace properties. That's what generative AI does for you. Whether it is complex summarization across multiple documents. Imagine this. If you are working on a document and you're wondering, where do I get the data from? An assistant going across multiple sets of siloed data, bringing them all together, summarizing that. How powerful is that? And summarizing it, synthesizing it, creating content like what we saw in the earlier slide. The ability for you to create, synthesize, discover new data, new things about your entire data landscape, convert that into interesting inferences you can introduce and influence your business decisions. And then finally, create differentiated, engaging experiences. Remember, I was talking to you about image, video, etc. Here, we typed a text that you wanted to create a spring campaign. And the result was a combination of images and text. And the combinations could be text, video, image, everything that is possible. Similarly, you could have multiple types of interaction with it. I was talking to you about responsible AI. We've just started. There is going to be a lot more coming on in generative AI over the next few months and years. It's going to be impacting all our lives, whether it is personal, business, as well as a society. And we do this in a very responsible way, helping organizations create together. The next generation of collaboration is here now, and we are amping it up. The connections that we make within the Google Workspace with respect to how we collaborate with each other, especially is relevant in these hybrid times. Hybrid is the reality now. Hybrid work type is the reality, and therefore it becomes so easy. We do this in a very secure way, making sure harmful content never gets there. Making sure your IP, your copyright, your license regulations, and etc. are staying within the ambit of your cloud tenant, so that those data doesn't get back into training the original or parent models. So I'm really excited about the possibilities the generative AI presents to create more and more, create very interesting and what was seemingly impossible solutions to life now. I'm really looking forward to the exciting conversations with all of you. Have a great evening, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Natarajan, for sharing your expertise. It's truly remarkable to see how technology is advancing. Ladies and gentlemen, now taking this forward in an era of unprecedented technological prowess, we stand on the brink of a transformative decade. Cutting-edge breakthrough in space, in agriculture, in health are set to redefine the course of humanity. From the boundless potential of AI-driven progress and quantum computing to the dawn of sustainable solutions and human augmentation, the next Techade promises to create a world that is interconnected, efficient, and just. Our guests for the next panel discussion, titled Startup Nation Powering India's Techade, represent diverse fields which makes him uniquely qualified to speak about convergence of technologies, the ethical dilemmas technology poses, and how it will push the boundaries of our collective conscience. They will share ideas on this platform on how we can all unlock the full potential of the Techade and ensure that the future is both sustainable and inclusive. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming onto the stage the moderator of this session, Reema Tendulkar, anchor and editor, Technology and Telecom, CNBC TV18. Welcome, Reema. We're just going to wait for the stage to be set for our guests and then invite our panelists on. All right, it's time for us to invite our esteemed panelists for the panel onto the stage, starting with founder and CEO of Sictuple, Tathagato Dastedar. I'm sure we can do better than that, right? Let's see if we can by inviting onto the stage Krishna Kumar, founder and CEO at Cropen. Thank you, Mr. Kumar, for joining us. Our next panelist is Varun Khurana, founder at OTP Crofarm. We're very glad to have amongst us Chief AI Officer of Cure.ai, Pritham Putha. Thank you, Mr. Putha, for joining us. And we have amongst us on the panel Karthik Reddy, co-founder and managing partner, Bloom VC. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Over to you, Reema.
Thank you very much, Ritika. So, Startup Nation. What are startups? Who are entrepreneurs? Well, they're the crazies. They do the unthinkable. When everyone is walking in one direction, they walk in the other direction. And when plan A fails, they tell themselves the alphabet has 25 more letters. So welcome to the Startup Panel, Startup Nation, powering this decade. We have with us the Young Turks. You know, CNBC TV18 is synonymous with Young Turks. So we have the rising stars, the entrepreneurs from two key sectors, healthcare and agritech. We're going to be focusing on that, and we've got with us the man who's going to fund them all, Karthik Reddy of Bloom VC, Venture Capital. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining in today. I'm Reema Tendulkar. So before we get started, I thought it would be quite nice to just understand a little bit more about these people, to know their journey, what their company does, what their startup does. So why don't you take it away, Dr. Dastedar?
Thank you, Reema, and thanks to CNBC for inviting me here to this forum. So, I am the founder and CEO of Sictuple, a medtech startup, and I think belong to one of those crazies that Reema talked about, because I decided to start a health tech startup having absolutely zero background in the medical domain. That's probably as crazy as it gets. And what we do is we want to automate the manual microscopic review process that happens in a clinical laboratory today. So you see, when a lot of sick patients require their biological samples to be looked at by a doctor under the microscope manually. And that process remains manual in 95% plus of clinical laboratories all over the world. Our aim is to automate that through robotics and AI.
So you've got a device which converts the blood sample into
digital
a digital image, and then you use AI to analyze it and diagnose.
Yes.
So bringing down the turnaround down. Okay. So before we get to Krishna, we've got from Cure AI, the chief of AI product. So Pritham, why don't you first tell us?
Hi. Thanks for inviting me. This is Pritham. I'm currently the chief AI officer for Cure. At Cure.ai, we have products that can automatically read chest x-rays, CT scans, and MRIs and create a preliminary report within a minute. We are currently live in about 2,000 hospitals across 80 countries, basically augmenting diagnostic workflows for tuberculosis, lung cancer, stroke, heart failure, and osteoporosis. So I mean, when we are talking about augmenting diagnostic workflows today, there is significant issue in terms of staffing shortages. There is a lot of physician burnout. We are trying to sort of be a clinical decision support tool that can augment a patient's healthcare journey and solve these issues.
Thank you very much. So as it happens, I think both the gentlemen here are from helping us with the diagnosis, whether it's blood, urine samples, or your scans, CT, MRI, etc., and coming up with more accurate diagnosis, faster turnaround time. Karthik, why don't you come in, right? I think right now we're just covering the ambit of diagnosis, but there is so much more in healthcare startups. There is predictive healthcare. You've got robots assisting actual doctors in their surgeries. So how do you see the healthcare startup in India, the challenges, the opportunities?
It's great. The sectors that you're representing today on stage are just two of the many. So from a venture perspective, we're a generalist tech fund. Our history is that we started 13 years ago as a $20 million fund. Come a long way. Now we manage about $600 million. And we've consistently stuck to one thing that we know best, which is to find opportunities at seed stage, right? So we come in really early. So the idea is to be ahead of the curve, to try and see what entrepreneurs are building and try to really be sort of at the beginning and the forefront of like transformative stuff. So within healthcare and AI and agri itself, Bloom would have, for example, Healthify or an Ultrahuman, which are trying to pick up data from consumer behavior and try to be more predictive on health, which you can try and get people into the gym all day long, but essentially if you're not using that data or if you're not capturing that data, there is much lesser motivation for that consumer to try and improve their health. So we're beginning to see those kind of models. Of course, diagnosis, you're seeing two great examples of what the Indian ecosystem has thrown out. We're also seeing, within diagnosis, we have a company like Tricog, for example, which actually does that for ECG readings, like how they do it for blood samples and lung cancer. And within agri as well, I think, the fascinating part about applications of AI are, they've been around for 10 years, like our friend from Google just said. And they've been applied to more data models and to, images which have been very, very specific to these kind of applications. So we have a robotics play called Nico, which actually looks for weeds and helps in spraying. And it's entirely done by actually cameras mounted on the back of a tractor. So the number of applications just keeps proliferating. I think the challenge and the opportunity from an Indian perspective is how can you deliver that innovation at a price point that is more relevant to either the US, and then you can build an American-facing company sitting out of India, and there's a lot of money in that. Or can you build something at a cost point that an Indian farmer can use and an Indian ECG administrator can use? And can we build, amazing models that can go to the third world, which arguably from a scale perspective is much bigger than the first world. And I think that is the India opportunity in AI, and doubly so in these two areas, which affect everybody every day, agri and healthcare.
The idea of selecting these two sectors, healthcare and agriculture, is because here every innovation can have a very deep impact. So for instance, in agriculture, I think the benefit of agriculture goes far beyond even the economic indicators. It impacts the social fabric. More than 1/3 of the Indians are in some way involved in agriculture and allied activities. And I think I read somewhere it's the only sector where the contribution of women in terms of hours put far outshines that of men. So the social and economic impact of agriculture and healthcare, of course, we need to make it accessible and more affordable, is very, very deep. So let's just quickly get that introduction from our other two guests. Krishna, why don't you go?
Thanks. Hi, this is Krishna. I'm a CEO and founder of Cropin Technology. So for people who don't know Cropin is a industry cloud for intelligent agriculture. We try to solve many complex challenges in this industry, putting data and AI in the front. And some of the challenges like how do you digitize smallholder farmer, which is across India or Africa? What does that platform look like? How do you bring all this data together? and talk about long-term impact of those crops going to have because of the changing climate or rising temperature, or what disease can happen in next 7 days, or what yield you can expect at the time of the harvest, right? So can you be so predictive? And can you zoom into a plot so that a value can go to a smallest grower, whether he's in India or Orissa, or he's in Africa, or whether he's in Latam? Can you look at a microgrid of 10 by 10 meter scale to the choice he has made, the crop he has taken, the variety he's growing? Can you make it more contextual to him? And then you can zoom out to a country scale to talk about, okay, what is how the wheat or paddy or soybean is growing in the country, what will be the total output, and what should be the policy of the government, whether it's from the export or import, or buying fertilizers at the county level or a district level, right? Or to underwrite a insurance program like that. So that kind of technology we're building. It's also working with a lot of research facing industries who are trying to build new traits in the seeds, which could be a drought resistance or certain disease resistant, right? You need a lot of data to play around and predict those traits in that. So those are kind of work we are doing. So impacting the life of the farmer at one end and scaling that to a country scale where the enterprises, dev agencies, and government can take decisions as well. Today we are deployed in 92 countries. We manage around 30 million acres. We have a crop knowledge graph of 500 crops, 10,000 varieties of those crops from these continents. That means how these crops are behaving behaving today in this changing climate, or what kind of pattern they are following. And we process around 200 billion acres of intelligence for our customers to use and take decision basis that in the real time. So that's pretty much we do. Thank you.
Very interesting. Varun, do you want to tell us? We've got Varun Khurana here with us. He's from Crow Farm OTP. Tell us about the business and what inspired you on this journey.
Sure. Thank you, Rima. Thank you for having me. So just to give you a quick brief, see, we are a fruits and vegetables supply chain from farm to home. Broadly, the thought process is that when you're dealing with commodities that degrade so quickly, fruits and vegetables, right? We are talking hours. So in hours, the produce can change shape. So conventional e-commerce as it exists today is not really designed for commodities that have such lower shelf life. And which is why often we see, the need for when you go to a shop, you have to pick and choose because, produce has degraded. And when you order from e-commerce, you see variability in quality that you get because the produce has spent, varying times in the supply chain. So we have designed our supply chain, which can move produce from farm to home in as little as 12 hours. This gives us a very unique advantage because produce doesn't sit in our supply chain, and by virtue of that, we don't incur many wastages at all. So just to give you the numbers, while conventional supply chain sees 30% wastage, we see 3% wastage. So 10 times we've been able to bring it down. And that gives us a lot of power. We can pay our farmers a little bit more. We can give our consumers competitive prices. And this also makes our unit economics work broadly. So that is, the thesis behind the business, where consumers can get produce which is fresher at their home at a competitive price. Farmers can get more value for their money. Today in Delhi NCR, we do about 150 tons every day. In Bombay, we do about 25 tons every day. And actually, it is AI prediction that is used to actually predict how much we're going to sell the following day, which is what the farmers use as a guideline to harvest, and which is what consumers also use when they buy stuff on our app. So this is how technology, overarches this whole end-to-end supply chain to reduce wastages.
Interesting. Karthik, come in on, funding these agri-tech startups, right? One would think it's complex in a way that your models are based on probability rather than deterministic models. You're subject to the vagaries of climate. Like 1 degree change in the temperature can affect the crop yield substantially. There are flash floods taking place. So when you have to invest in agricultural startups, How do you go about it? And what do you think about the scalability of the sector to achieve it on a pan-India scale or at a global scale? The processes, the products?
So in India, I feel like opportunity sets fall into two buckets. One, which is essentially you go and build supply chains, or you build technology which sits on top of the aggregate, value chain today. One scales beautifully because it doesn't necessarily rely on all the vagaries of what you just said at the ground level, which OTP has to worry about. Whereas if you take a crop in, they're essentially building technology which is like sort of geography neutral in that sense and can become a global sort of monitoring system. So when we look at opportunities, we see whether there is enough value in the technology that end customers will pay for, whether that's corporates, governments, farmers. Farmers are the toughest to get anything out of. But you have to sit in the middle of that value chain if you're in an operational business, like he does in OTP. And that's how I would evaluate anything which is operational on the ground in India, versus a technology play looks very seductive because it's cool technology, but will anyone pay the actual value for it? Clearly, Krishna has shown that people do pay. And so we will usually try to bracket into these two sort of halves of how we look at agriculture as an opportunity set. But it's not easy. At seed, you don't know these answers. And as most people in the audience or on the stage know, failure rates in startups are high because that discovery is what we fund, right? So you essentially might have a technology, but might not be something that's paid for. And so the common jargon is there a product market fit? Product market fit is not whether your product wasn't great or not, whether someone's willing to pay the right price for it or not. And eventually that's where most startups slip and fail or become very subscale and becomes inefficient. But, as I said, if you take something as simple as crops, weeding, and your what is a substitute product? It's a migrant labor pool which moves from cotton farm to cotton farm in Maharashtra, Andhra Pradesh, Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh. So that cost is very, very measurable. The farmer is not going to pay 1 rupee additionally for any cool technology that you provide, right? In fact, it has to be more efficient at the same cost or lower cost for the efficiency that you're delivering. And essentially, the advantage that India has over most global providers, like if you go to an Israeli company or an American company, is we can deliver that technology at probably half to 1/5 the cost. And I think in that sense, we're just on the cusp of seeing the first sort of global players in health and agri, which historically was only seen as the realm of SaaS and software because it didn't require hardware and operational sort of cross-border migration. I think we're going to start seeing that. We're going to start seeing deep tech companies which become global, can become public, can become $1 billion of value. But we haven't even seen the first. So I am jumping the gun. But that's...
Are you skeptical?
No, I'm optimistic because I have enough in my portfolio which are headed that way. And with a gray orange which automates warehouses in the US, Carbon Clean which captures, carbon and is seen as one of UK's best innovators today because we exported the company to the UK. So the UK has claimed ownership of that, right? But they were all Indian companies, right? And just because they're domiciled in Delaware or the UK does not mean they're Indian companies.
So the promise of this decade is that Indian startups are going to go global. Up until now, it's been the realm of only SaaS companies.
Correct.
In the 90s, it was outsourcing companies. The early 2000s has been about SaaS. Yeah. But you're saying in the next decade, it's going to be these deep tech startups.
I'm just sticking to these two areas. There are a lot more. We're seeing in manufacturing, we're beginning to see orders come in from Israel and the US for a sort of 5-axis machining company in India, which we have in Bangalore. So it's beginning to happen in other areas as well. I'm very optimistic about this.
Okay. Getting these companies to scale. Very quickly, I want to talk about generative AI. We just heard that fascinating presentation from Subram, the kind of exciting opportunities that lie ahead, and the intersection of AI and any market that you're in. That's the current hot topic. That's the vogue. So can you tell us some interesting use cases that all of you all are using, researching, some pilot projects, some actual critical applications using, AI going ahead? Dr. Dasidar? Yeah.
Sure. So in the field that we operate in, which is diagnostics, I am a bit skeptical about the applicability of generative AI.
But you all have so much data on your hands.
Yes, but therein lies the problem. Because generative AI learns from the data that we have seen. And can I guarantee that the data I have is equal to the cumulative knowledge of the doctors who have been learning the trade for decades? Therein lies the problem. If a diagnosis is being written of cancer, do you want to, or suspected cancer, do you want an AI to generate that diagnosis, or do you want the human to be assisted with AI, maybe with suggestions? But the diagnosis should remain in the hand of the AI.
So the big risk is that if your AI model throws up a false negative, right? You don't want that scenario.
Even false positives can be equally pestering, because somebody might end up getting a treatment which he or she does not need, but they are, I would say, less dangerous.
It's going to go through one more stage where it will be checked and diagnosed, right?
But
so false negative is a big worry.
Yes, false negatives are the big worry. But however, AI has its applicability in the diagnostic space. Right from automating, predicting the sample quality, predicting what tests should be done one after the other. There are hundreds of applications. Coming specifically to generative AI, what an use case I have been thinking of, we are not working on this. So suppose, there are doctors you see who can make a patient feel better just by talking to them, right? And some people actually have that ability to generate that confidence or generate that feel-good factor in people. And not everybody has it. And it is a skill which is difficult to learn. I'll probably never be able to learn it. But can the AI assist the doctor, a generative AI, assist any doctor to go to that level where they can actually say things which makes a patient feel better? This is just a dream that I have. Not that I'm working about it, but maybe one day, yes, it's possible.
Preetam, what is your dream, aspiration? How are you planning to incorporate generative AI in your business?
So, there are two things, right? One is the generative AI stuff, that is the buzzword. The other buzzword that is coming out is foundational models. So, in terms of generative AI for healthcare, we are seeing that there is adoption starting to happen for those high-impact, low-risk applications, like taking away the clerical work that physicians do. There's a study that says 25% of a physician's time in the US is spent doing administrative tasks. This is like a really low-risk opportunity to improve productivity, right? That is one. And anything that has to do with diagnostics and anything that is patient-facing, there is significant regulatory scrutiny. There are a lot of questions that we have to answer, right? Like for example, what if AI gives a false positive and then because of that there is some surgery that happened due to which a lung lobe has been resected, right? Those are scary things. So anything diagnostic and patient-facing, there's still time. There's one analogy with respect to generative AI, right? So it's as if a car has suddenly been given to the healthcare industry and none of the stop signs, traffic lights, or even the roads, are built for that. Because, in the sense that the digital infrastructure that is required to, capture all of these touch points and give interventions at those points is still not built out for healthcare in general. The second aspect is foundation models. We are working on medical foundation models. We have a repository of more than 1 billion images. 200 million or so images come to our servers from our live sites. So we are working on foundation models. So the sort of goal is to increase the sample efficiency. So for example, now if you want to solve a new problem, it takes about 100,000 images. Now with foundation models, with the context of 1 billion images, a model that has seen 1 billion images knows about human anatomy, knows what a CT looks like, knows what an MRI looks like. Now if you want to sort of create a new use case where you want to segment some tumor in the liver, that is sort of something that can be done with a significantly lower amount of data. Yeah.
Interesting. Krishna, your whole business model is built on AI, right? But AI is evolving much faster than you and I can imagine. So what's next for your company? How are you using AI now?
Yeah, so let me give you a few examples and what we are trying to solve, right? If you look at the vision of Cropin is to put intelligence on every farm which is possibly producing food for the planet, right? So how do you reach there? And the scalable technology is space. When you take images from the space, there are multiple bands, you train your models on that, and then predict about the crops. But the biggest headwind or problem statement is every day, 70% of the planet is covered with the cloud. and shadows. So if your input is wrong to your model, or there are errors, you're not able to do a good job in the accuracy. And we realize that when we are trying to deploy this technology at the country scale, right? So not somewhere you will find all these problems. And that's where the generative AI comes into picture, where you reconstruct the image. First you detect where is the cloud, then what angle the shadow is, and then you have to reconstruct the image beneath, then feed into your deep learning models to talk about the crop and the intelligence and doing all the predictive, right? That's it's a kind of architecture you have to build. And that's something called as a foundation model. And the foundation model is you can reconstruct anything using this, right? So you can generalize this to other industries as well. And what we built can also be generalized to other industry. So probably we have been working because we face that problem when we are trying to deploy at the scale. Now the use cases, let's come to the use cases. And I'll give you 2 examples. So one of the largest CPG company does potato, and we predict, and using all this technology in the background, we predicted a farm for them, and we were doing it in 5 countries. That, okay, this potato farm has reached tuber bulking stage. The potato is within the soil, you can't see that, but these models are running. And prior to that stage is a tuber initiation stage. So tuber is small, the potato is small, now it has become bigger. So there was a senior agronomist, a scientist, there was a junior agronomist. So one of the guys said that, no, looks like this is a tuber initiation stage. The senior guy said, no, looks like it's a tuber bulking stage. So they decided to take out the potato, and it was in a tuber bulking stage. And one other thing we discussed with the senior scientists and everyone, if you can put such kind of intelligence on every farm with an equal lens, right? Even if you're 85% accurate, it's a huge improvement in the way you do. Because if everybody has if I see a farm with my experience, I can have a certain assessment. The senior guy comes in, he will have a certain assessment, right? So there's a lot of gut-based decision, experience-based decision is coming, but can you build science into that? And that's the job we are doing. But let's take example of Ukraine war, right? So there's a wheat shortage, fertilizer prices gone up, energy prices gone up. And the biggest concern for the governments, and we have been working with Nigeria government, where they are the bread eating economy. So they import a lot of wheat because they don't produce wheat in the country. So our job was to figure it out how much wheat country is doing. Can you predict that? Can you tell me how much is the sowing progression? What is the health of those crops in season? And before the maturity, can you tell me what the volume I'll expect so that I can do the forward contract, or I can import wheat at the right time and right amount because the prices has gone up? Or if you can tell me a trends by county, I can ensure how much fertilizer to import for that, or buy for that county, or budget for that county, right? So look at the scale. One side is impacting it, looking at the, providing intelligence to a farmer, right, to change practices or apply, because your crop is moving faster, you need to do certain things on that or take certain decisions. At the same time, government can use this kind of technology to do that. So that's how you use this kind of a technology to power your knowledge graph, AI models and everything.
The only thing is right now it's very expensive, and who's going to be footing that bill? Karthik, you want to quickly comment on that?
No, I think the challenge continues to be, I think the power of generative AI is to, yes, you're right, it is expensive today. The key is going to be, can we use these models to be able to actually cut down the cost to a point where they become applicable to use cases of this nature, daily use cases, right? And if it's an agri, it's all our supply chains can be better, right? And I think we're going to be a more resource-starved, relatively speaking, or resource-constrained economy in terms of what efficiencies you want to drive. And that I don't think you can fix manually, right, anymore. So what we've done with milk production in this country is one marvel, but can we replicate that for every crop in this country? Can we become the forefront of, sort of getting enough forest cover, plant cover, such that we are actually contributing to be net carbon positive, in that sense, net carbon negative in that sense. All of this is going to be driven, I think, by how we measure things through AI. And it's inevitable that we'll have to build our own stack. We can't rely on the West giving us models on these. And so that's what I foresee, at least in agri per se. And in healthcare, I feel, there's personalized medicine or personalized treatment is essentially the future. And again, it's not a human, it's not something that a human mind can solve. And we'll have to feed more and more data, even if it's, of course, it has to be anonymized, but into these models to be able to generate better sort of prescriptions for how we treat people. Otherwise, we again can't scale this to 1.4 billion people effectively. And I think you can't get healthcare out, high-quality healthcare out to every corner of this country or the world without solving for that. So I think directionally, these are the two things I would want AI to solve for these two industries at least.
Well, with a phone in everyone's hand and a device, we are getting deeper, smarter insights into our body, which will help with personalized medication. But, unfortunately, Varun, we're not able to take this question because we're completely out of time on this panel. But thank you very much for joining in. Hope you enjoyed it. I just want to end with one quote that I read about from Winston Churchill. He said, success is not final, failure is not fatal, hope, the courage to continue to move on, that's the key. So I hope we all do our part in making this decade India's Techade. Thank you very much.
Thank you to all the panelists for sharing your views. It was really interesting to see panelists from diverse fields come together and share the view on powering India's Techade. Ladies and gentlemen, while we set up the stage for what's coming on next, let me just quickly ask all of you, raise your hands if you've ever experienced city floods. Ever got stuck in city floods in any city of India? Please raise your hands. I think a whole lot of you, right? And keep your hands raised if you've been stuck in city floods in more than one city in India. Still a whole lot of you. So this problem definitely runs across multiple cities in the country. And up next on the stage is coming a young innovator who is going to be proposing his prototype as a solution for this problem. Ladies and gentlemen, his innovation is called Sludge Knight, which is a cloud-based drain management system for predictive analysis using deep learning and AI. Please welcome, with a round of applause, Class 12 student at Amity International School, Push Bihar, Delhi, Shivam Mukherjee. All the best, Shivam.
Thank you. So, congratulations, ladies and gentlemen. Chandrayaan is about to land on the lunar surface. And it's on Wednesday, right? Yeah. So, are you telling me a nation which is now reaching the stars and beyond cannot do anything for these people? These are manual scavengers. And they are suffering every single day in our sewers, cleaning our filth with their bare hands. Now, in very simple terms, this is a very simple equation. Now, our infrastructure is growing at an astronomical pace, and our sewer systems, decades outdated, are crumbling. The backbones of our cities are crumbling. Because of this, manual scavengers have to go down in sewers, and they cannot clean it properly because it's not in a regimentated manner. And what happens because of that? City floods, millions of assets lost, thousands of vector-borne diseases. So, what's the solution? Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Shivam Mukherjee. I am from Amity International School, Push Bihar. I am a class 12 student. And this is my solution to it all, Sludge Knight. Sludge Knight is an artificially intelligent, cloud-based sewer management system, or what I would say an ecosystem, which has majorly two subsystems, a hardware subsystem and a software subsystem. These are modular in nature. I'll be coming to that later. Coming to the hardware subsystem. The hardware subsystem is divided in majorly three parts: the cleaning unit, the control unit, and the support unit. The cleaning unit is an autonomous, adaptable robot which will go down in the sewer to clean it. The control unit is a unit which will help in maneuvering this cleaning robot throughout the sewers, and the support unit will provide it with necessities. So as you can see, it will be lowered down into the sewer, and this will work by pumping out sludge continuously from the sewer. And guess what? It's a tireless worker. It does not need breaks or any leaves. Now, Sludge Knight has several other features, as you can see here, some salient features, and has an instrument cluster fitted to its cleaning unit, which will map data from within the sewer. So data such as, let's say, any cracks or defects within the sewer, and will help the user see within it. Now, here are a few data regarding the cleaning and the control and support unit. And over here, you can see the control and support unit provide several features to the cleaning unit. Now, what if, ladies and gentlemen, what if I could tell you the exact date, the exact time, the exact second a sewer will clog, a manhole will burst? Won't that be magical? Well, that is the magic of the AI and ML systems, the software of Sludge Knight, the true brainchild of it all. How does it work? It's pretty simple. All the Sludge Knights working in a certain area will work like a swarm, sending data to a hub, which is a central server. Now, this hub and spoke mechanism, as stated, will collect data from each cleaning session, such as from where to where did it clean, what amount of sludge came out, and other data. And using this data, it will be able to compute a priority gradient, areas which need cleaning first to areas which need cleaning later. Let's say Chanakyapuri mein bahut flooding hoti hai. It's a lot of, let's say it's a lot of sludge. It's high on the priority gradient. And let's say Kalkaji, not so much, right below. And using this data, we can create a smart software application which can be used by admins in order to access the data within a sewer system and get the health of their sewer on a moment's notice. Includes a dashboard with very important features, as you can see, and a zone-wise map which will show the exact deployment schedules present within a certain zone within any state or area. It has a scheduling calendar and the most important feature of all, that is the deployment scheduler. Any flagged location can be selected, and upon selection, the AI will give the optimum Sludge Knight for the job, the time it should be deployed, the date it should be deployed, and all the necessary details within a moment's notice. Now, Sludge Knight has a sales strategy which is pretty simple. Our modules, hardware and software, are something which we are going to be giving on a modular basis. You can buy both or you can buy either one according to your system. And in order to reduce the initial load of the initial load of the price of this system, we can give it on a rent basis to our clients as well. Now, as you can see in the feature comparison, Sludge Knight obviously draws higher amount of features in a very affordable price in compared to legacy systems, thus giving you the best thing in the market in the most affordable price. Now see, dignitaries, I am a student, and I believe innovation starts with awareness, and ignorance is the enemy of the truth. And this problem, this grave situation, is a demon which lives on the fringes of our awareness. It feeds on our ignorance. Today, it is time to shake the status quo. And I request you all, people who keep a stake in the most important part of our country, and that is innovation, to rise up and help me to achieve my goal and give these people a chance at a better life in a country which is reaching the stars. Thank you, dignitaries, and may you have a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Shubham. That was really, really inspiring. A huge round of applause for the young innovator, ladies and gentlemen. And now, ladies and gentlemen, as we all know, that bridging the digital divide is key to India becoming a developed nation by 2047. To take this discussion forward, ladies and gentlemen, up next is a special fireside chat titled Innovate, Develop, Transform India's Techade Journey. And we are very glad that we have amongst us, it's an absolute honor, Rajiv Chandrasekhar, Minister of State, Skill Development and Entrepreneurship, and Electronics and IT, in conversation with Shireen Bhan, Managing Editor, CNBC, will be here in just a few moments as we set the stage up for this fireside chat. But before that, how many of you have enjoyed the evening so far? Raise your hands. And I think the tinkering of the young innovators has really added a special flavor to it. Don't you agree? I think all of us would agree on that. So power to you, both the young boys here, and we hope to see a lot more talent on this stage in the next editions. And now, ladies and gentlemen, as we set the stage for the fireside chat, let me quickly invite onto the stage Shireen Bhan, Managing Editor, CNBC TV18, to take forward a very, very important fireside chat with the Honorable Minister who is joining us, Minister of State, Skill Development and Entrepreneurship and Electronics and IT, Rajiv Chandrasekhar. Thank you, Honourable Minister, for making time out for this. Thank you so much. Over to you, Shireen.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause for the Minister. He's flown in straight from Bangalore to be here with us for the Digital India Vision 8.0. Mr. Chandrasekhar, this is the 8th year that we're doing this, really charting out the digital journey and the digital roadmap for India. You know, before I talk to you about some of the nitty-gritties that we will get into, let me get a sense from you on what transpired in Bangalore at the G20 meetings. There's a lot of expectation that during the course of the Ministerial that India will present a governance framework for digital public good infrastructure, a definition for digital public good as well. Take us through what has transpired and how confident and optimistic you are about future global collaborations.
So Shane, thank you for having me over this evening, and thank you for that first question, which is certainly a breaking news question. I can see that. But look, I think the ministerial declaration will be something that we have to wait and see what comes out tomorrow. And I certainly don't want to second guess that or preempt that. But I certainly can tell you, with all the bilaterals that we have been having before today and leading up to today, that the India story over the last 9 years and how Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji's vision of these DPIs, digitizing government, and how that has transformed the entire paradigm of governance is something that certainly every country today is interested in adopting, following, and recreating in their own governments, in their own countries. We have, as you know, already signed about 8 different MOUs, India and other countries, to transfer this open source, very flexible framework of the India stack, which is the DPI that India has built. But I think more than the technology and more than the stack and more than any of that, the innovation, the power to empower that these DPIs represent is certainly something that has caught the imagination of most countries in the world.
You know, speaking of catching the imagination of most countries in the world, and I know I can't preempt the ministerial statement, but give us a sneak peek, if you will. Is there consensus on the broad principles as far as the governance framework is concerned? Is there consensus on financing as well? I mean, what are the key aspects that you believe we could see consensus emerge on?
Look, under the Indian presidency of the G20, I think most of what India is saying as the president of G20 and to the G20, countries of the G20, and indeed countries outside that as well, who are invitees to it, is simply something that is, something that is very deeply acceptable to countries, which is when we say Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, that as you apply to the tech space, says that we really believe that digitization and the power of technology should be available to the global south as much as it is available to the larger countries. That the narrative for several decades that technology and innovation were rooted in some countries and some companies needs to be transformed, where more and more open source platforms make it possible for even the smallest country to have durable ambitions of becoming digital nations, creating digital economies for themselves. So I think that message that India is giving in this G20 presidency, that message backed by our own case study, if you want to call it that, over the last 9 years, is certainly, I think, something that's going to be reflected in the ministerial declaration tomorrow. I don't want to go into that. I know you will try and bait me into it. I'm a veteran of this, so I will certainly not get into that. It is absolutely
correct and appropriate for us to wait for what comes out tomorrow.
No, I agree. So I'm going to take the Pele pass and move on to the other subject. And let's talk about the piece of legislation that's just been cleared by Parliament, and that is the Privacy and Protection Bill that has gone through. While I'll address some of the specific concerns that have been raised with the bill, which is now an act, let's talk about the execution roadmap. What timelines are we talking about? Is it a question of months? Is it a question of a year or more? When are we actually going to see the digital platform? When will we see the board being set up? If you can give us some indication and insight on the execution roadmap.
So Shireen, thank you for congratulating me, even if you didn't say it. Thank you for congratulating the government for doing something which I believe is extremely foundational to our country's vision of an India Techade and a $1 trillion digital economy. It's a very, very building block legislation that on one hand protects the rights for the first time, codifies the rights of our citizens, as well as creates a compliance framework that does not come in the way of innovation and growth. Look, on the issue of transition, we recognize in the government that it is certainly the bill and the act represents a transition from a current regime to an absolutely new regime. And the new regime of data protection is designed to create behavioral changes in data platforms and data companies that process personal data of Indian citizens. And we certainly want it to be orderly. We certainly want the transition to be not disruptive for both consumers and the companies involved, including startups. So we will sit with the industry and work out a relatively reasonable transition period and a framework. Of course, you must understand there are two very competing pressures here. One is the industry saying, give us infinite time.
Okay.
And then our duty to the citizens to say that these rights that are now in the legislation should be available to you at the earliest. So these are effectively two opposite poles of the pulls and pushes. But we will sit with the industry, we will sit with consumer groups and work out a process and a time frame that will ensure at the heart of it that the entire transition is orderly. And I have already said this in public, and I suspect there will be 2 or 3 graded transition roadmaps, some for the more mature, larger tech companies who can afford and put resources to transition faster, and they make a bigger impact on our consumers. And some, maybe startups and some entities that are less digitized, take a little longer.
Okay, so you're talking about a graded rollout, one for the big tech and one for the startup ecosystem and the less evolved as far as the digital journey is concerned.
Correct.
But when you talk about a reasonable time frame, because you did explain to us the conflict, the pulls and pressures that you are dealing with, what would qualify as a reasonable time frame? Are we talking about 6 months, 12 months? What do we say?
I don't want to even suggest that I have a view on that. Nothing that we have done so far has been without consultation. We will certainly have deep, meaningful conversations with the industry, with the consumer groups, and evolve a framework. I don't want to say that I have a view on it or somebody else in the room has a view on it, and that's the view. We will work on this in an absolutely consultative manner, take views on board to understand what is required for an orderly transition, and we will go by that.
Okay, let me address some of the specific concerns with respect to what is now this Protection and Privacy Act. And I don't want to focus too much on just this because there's plenty more to talk about. Sure. But let me address some of the key concerns. One on the board itself and the composition of the board itself. In fact, Justice Sri Krishna has alluded to the fact that this could become, in fact, a captive board of the government. I know that you, as well as Minister Vaishnav, have equated this to something like SEBI, saying that, look, the government appoints the SEBI chairman, the tenure and so on and so forth. They're paid by the government as well. But how do you respond to this criticism and this concern that is being raised?
So, first of all, I certainly don't want to necessarily explain every paranoid view of the legislation. I mean, there are things that I've heard that border on being reasonably absurd, saying this empowers a surveillance state, it grants unfettered powers to government, and certainly people are entitled to their views, but I certainly want to convey to your audience that this is a very well thought through, deeply consulted framework that has been built here. So none of this came out because
We just woke up one day in the morning and said, let's draft a bill. Second is on the issue of the DPB, the Data Protection Board. I want to be very clear that the Data Protection Board's role in the bill is a very narrow role. It is not SEBI, it is not a regulator, it is not a statutory body. It's a body that adjudicates the dispute between those whose personal data have been given to a platform and the platform who has in turn breached the obligations under the law. It is simply, for want of a better word, it's an adjudicating body. Now, an adjudicating body's performance and accountability is going to be determined by its outcomes, its conduct, its results. And the DPB is a very digital organization. It will have tremendous amount of disclosure and transparency requirements. The appeals of the DPB lie in a TD SAT, which will be chaired by a retired Supreme Court judge. And the appeal there, the final appeal, lies in the Supreme Court. So therefore, the process that has been designed to ensure accountability and transparency will determine the efficacy and the performance of the DPP. Sitting today and having these over-imaginative views that this is a captive body and a not captive body is to do injustice to the group of people who will do this as a commitment to build an institution. The institution is going to be a very important institution to adjudicate disputes in the data economy for the next several years. And we have absolutely every intention to make this a high-quality, global standard, very credible institution. So our intentions, plus the fact that the design of the organization creates a lot of oversight on what it does and how it does, should today, for the moment, keep people confident about the direction that we are going in. And then, of course, down the road, if the DPP does not do a good job, everybody's entitled to his fair share of criticism.
When will we see the DPP being set up?
So I think in this transition period, a lot of these things have to be set up. The rules have to be enacted. The DPP has to be notified. We have to also ask for people to come and serve on the DPP. As you know, we have openly signaled that we don't certainly want this to be an organization where there's only retired government or retired judges. We want young lawyers, we want youngsters to come in there and give 2, 3, 4, 5 years of their life to serve in these types of institutions that are modern, very fundamental institutions. And so we will see as we go along. I also have a challenge of bringing in talented people to serve there. So it's not just about designing, it's also about attracting good, committed, public service-oriented talent to serve there.
Fair enough. Let me address two of the other specific concerns. While there are many, I'll address just two more. One is with respect to the powers of blocking. Why did we need that to be part of this act? Because it was already under Section 69A of the IT Act. Why did you feel the need to bring it under this act as well?
So this blocking in this legislation is a very narrow blocking. It is for those who repeatedly violate the law. So if you read the construct there, if there is a platform that has breached the law, it gets penalized by the DPP once. Then if it does it again, it gets penalized again by the DPP. And we think that it's a good power to have to, in a sense, create a deterrent to a platform that may have figured out a way of gaming these penalties. To say that, look, it is not just that we will penalize you, but if you have repeated conduct of breaching the law, we also have the power to block you from the internet. We certainly don't want the internet to have players that are repeatedly violating the law. So that power is there in the government. Whether the government exercises it and what occasion does it exercise it, the government will decide.
Okay. The other specific concern is with regard to the dilution of the Right to Information Act. In fact, Justice A.P. Shah also believed that Section 8IJ managed to create that balance between the right to information as well as the right to privacy, and there was really no need for any amendment. How do you respond to that?
No, look, I certainly don't want to get into a debate with a judge or a justice. That's a failed proposition from the very beginning. But let me just explain what we have done, and then people are entitled to the views. Right to information is not right to personal information. And the Right to Information Act that basically requires a public servant or those in public life to disclose what they have to disclose under the law is intact, is untouched. But the right to information cannot mean, if I'm in public life or you're in public life, that somebody can query me on my blood group, what illness I have, what is my...
But that's surely not the intention or the concern
Yeah, but
either.
that is the only amendment, that the right to personal data protection, the right to privacy is a fundamental right.
Yeah.
And the right to information cannot be used to infringe that. That's all.
But in the case of larger public interest.
No, in the larger public interest, that is the point I'm making, that the right to information is not touched. But those who try to conflate right to information as being right to personal information are the people who are going to have a problem. For example, if I'm a public servant and somebody wants to know my assets or whatever,
yeah,
or any indication of conflict of interest, that certainly doesn't mean that they have the right to know what my blood group is. Or what my daughter's residential address is, or whatever. So that is the only amendment that has been done. Otherwise, the efficacy and all the rights under the Right to Information Act in terms of the accountability and disclosure of a public servant is intact. There's absolutely no change in that.
Okay, let me then address future legislation, the Digital India Act. Do you have enough on your plate for now, or do you believe that you have the appetite to take on more? And when can we expect the consultation process and then possible legislation being moved?
No, look, I'll tell you, this is not so much about plate or not. The Honorable Prime Minister's vision is very clear. We have to get to $1 trillion digital economy by 26. We are at about 11% of total GDP is a digital economy today. We want to get to 20%. The digital side of our economy is growing at about 2.8 times the normal economy. Now, one of the enabling requirements that we have is good global standard legislation, a framework of laws that allows our innovation economy to grow unimpeded. And the IT Act, which is the principal legislation today, is 22 years old. So I think we can all agree today that in the world that we live in, a 22-year-old legislation is certainly, and that legislation does not even mention internet, is not necessarily the best thing for our young startups and our innovation economy. So we are working non-stop on that. I think sooner rather than later, and as early as this month, we will start the process. We will get a draft out. We have already done, for the first time in the history of India, pre-consultation of the legislation. So we have gone around the country and talked to the stakeholders and said, what do you want in a new legislation? And we've collected a lot of information, and we've designed a legislation, and we think we will have the first draft out for you to critique.
Can you give us some of the broad principles or broad pillars that you are going to be prioritizing as part of this?
No. Look, I mean, I can't. It's obviously a new modern bill, but it certainly will look at the internet comprehensively. It will look at the internet through the prism of the various types of intermediaries. In 2000, when we legislated the IT Act, the concept of an intermediary was anybody between the consumer and the internet. And today you know that the complexity and the diversity and the vast expanse of the internet leads you from AI intermediaries to e-commerce to all kinds of other. So we think there's a need to understand that and define that. We also want to address the issue of user harm. Safety and trust, openness, safety and trust, and accountability are the three principles for us in legislating and rule making. And we think on the user harm side, there is a need to really comprehensively define what the rights of our citizens are and what are the no-go areas for platforms.
Okay, let's address two of the current issues that have attracted a fair amount of attention, Mindspace and headlines. And I'll start by talking to you about the import restrictions that have come in for laptops. August 3rd is when the government decided to make that announcement, saying that there will be import restrictions that will come in. August 4th, you decided to extend that timeline to November. Now, industry is asking for at least another 6 to 12 months. Are we likely to see a further extension? And the larger issue there is, why the need for import restrictions? Is it not contrary to the government's own belief that there should be minimum government and maximum governance? Aren't we going back to the old ways of doing things?
Yeah, so let me be very clear. I think from the get-go, I think this was communicated incorrectly. This is not about import restrictions at all. This is not about licensing at all. This is really our attempt to create a framework of import management, to understand the sources from which We want to regulate essentially at a time when we are at an inflection point of the digital economy growing and the digital penetration of digital devices in India really ramping up and growing rapidly. We want to be extremely careful about the sources of the devices. So this is really an import management framework.
Okay.
We want to be very careful about what is the hardware coming, where is it coming from. We want to be clear that we want more and more trusted hardware in our digital economy, whether it's a server, whether it's a cloud, whether it's a laptop. And you know, the cloudification is now expanding so rapidly that we think that India is going to be one of the largest procurers of data center servers. And so in keeping all that in mind, we want to create a framework where what comes into the country or what is deployed in our ecosystem is really trusted products. And so therefore, this is actually an import management system. And of course, in the process, we want to encourage more and more of the server brands and the server companies and the laptop and device companies to manufacture in India. And if not manufacture in India, at least go to a trusted place where they manufacture it, which is comfortable to us. So I think this is more of an import management framework. And we will certainly in the coming months, we are engaged. I have met with the industry, and there was obviously a lot of, I accept that because of the way we maybe did not communicate it, or we communicated it incorrectly, there was a lot of unease in the industry, and I quickly met them the next day and explained to them what our intentions are, and that we will take this intervening period of 90 days or 60 days, as the case may be, to try and do something that achieves government's goals, government's policy objectives of more domestic manufacture, more trusted products in the domestic ecosystem, as well as their own goals to have their supply chains not being disrupted.
So are you sympathetic to industry's demands, and are we likely to see November be extended even further?
Like I said, today let's not do any breaking news type of question and answer. We will see if that is required.
That's
what
journalists live for.
Yeah, I know, and that's my job to keep pushing back on that. Look, if you want to know our genetic makeup or our DNA is, we will certainly not do anything without the industry, without consulting the industry, and we certainly don't want to do anything that is disruptive. If we want to transition to a new framework of more trusted products, more domestically manufactured products because they are more trusted, we will do so in an orderly manner. And with the industry on board.
One is the aspect of being a trusted source, and you believe that this is linked to that aspect. But the other is the domestic production that you spoke of. Now, we've got the second version of the hardware PLI scheme. In fact, the deadline for this version ends after this current extension at the end of August. How much of this import management is actually linked to getting people to come into the PLI net, because it hasn't found many takers so far?
Look, I don't necessarily disagree with the characterization that the two are linked, and I think that's a fair misunderstanding to have. And I said it's a fair misunderstanding.
Is it a fair misunderstanding or a fair understanding?
I said it's a fair misunderstanding to have, and that is why I said this is about us making some mistakes in communicating it. This is not some Hathoda way of making people manufacture in India. I can assure you that. And that is why I have taken some pain to explain that our larger goal is to ensure that at a time when India's digitization is really accelerating, that the component, the systems that are now deployed in India are really trusted. We certainly don't want to be in the situation where countries like in the West find themselves having already invested and then having to wind back what they've already invested in and saying, no, these networks or these systems are not trusted anymore. And please understand, the other important trend here is, even on the core IP networks, the 5G, 6G networks, the composition or the intensity of IT and hardware systems are going to go up with the virtualization of these networks and Open RAN and all these. So this is the right time to create an import management framework, create incentives for domestic manufacture, but certainly be able to regulate sources where the imports come from.
You know, I also want to get an assessment from you on how well you believe that the mobile PLI scheme has worked, because that's one of the initial PLI schemes that were rolled out, and we're now seeing companies like Apple, etc., set up their manufacturing aspirations and manufacture here in India. How would you assess what has happened so far, and what's the aspiration now as far as the mobile PLI is concerned?
I think it's an absolutely, I mean, it is a brilliant PLI scheme. It has worked wonderfully well. And I'll just share with you, when Tim Cook dropped by recently and met me, he said one of the big reasons why Apple was able to ramp up so quickly in India was all the years of policy making and inputs that went into creating this enabling framework in India, leading up to their arrival in India. So I think the PLI for smartphones is really a template for other PLIs. It has certainly reset our ambitions on where India wants to be in terms of the electronics manufacturing, global supply chains and GVCs. You know that we have set out a goal of $300 billion of manufacturing by 2026 with $120 billion of exports. So it is clearly something that is making us very much more confident, because understand where we were in 2014, Shireen. We were importing 82% of our mobile phones. We had zero exports, and we had absolutely negligible presence in the electronics global GVCs, the global supply chains. And here we are today, you know, almost 100% of our mobile phone consumption is made in India. And we have exported last year 1 lakh crores of Apple and Samsung phones. So I think in a way, this is a very important demonstrator of our capabilities to these large number of electronics companies around the world that are seeking to diversify their manufacturing supply chains. And you are seeing that Cisco is now set up in India. We are hearing the legendary Elon Musk looking at India for his legendary product, the Tesla. So I think there is no way today anybody in the electronics global supply chains can ignore India as a possible alternate or a possible diversified hub for manufacturing.
You know, you talked about Elon Musk, and you said that there are reports suggesting that he's looking at India. Do you have any inside information on whether he is coming to India?
No, I don't have any insight, but I have a highly developed sense of intuition and common sense, and I think India is certainly a very, very viable and attractive place for Tesla to manufacture, and I hope that comes true.
Well, you know, we look forward to that announcement as well. But let me also ask you about the semiconductor space, because we've seen a few announcements being made on that front. Micron, of course, is one of them. Once again, how confident are you about continuing to attract large companies into India, large ticket FDI into India, given the fact that, you know, the US, for instance, is rolling out a massive program of its own to get people to manufacture semiconductors under the CHIPS Act in the US itself. There is also a global cooperation between India and the US. We've signed an MOU. So do we now have a better understanding of how this MOU between the two countries will work, and bringing more FDI into this space in India?
Yeah, so look, Shireen, semiconductor is like the frontier in a lot of ways. I'm sorry to use rhetoric like that or metaphors like that, but it is certainly the cutting edge of technology in the whole ecosystem of ideas and innovation. I mean, it is where, I like to say, it's where science and engineering intersect. It is an area where India has, over the last 65, 70 years, repeatedly either ignored the opportunity or not done what it should have done and lost opportunities. And there's a whole history that I don't want to bore you with, but certainly from 1957, from Fairchild Semiconductor's first packaging proposal to the mid-2012 Intel proposal for packaging, we have just ignored it. So in the last 15 months, we are sort of trying to make up for all of those lost time. And I think even if you are a hard-nosed cynic, you will take a look at the last 15 months and give us a report card, and you'll certainly give us an 8 out of 10 or 9 out of 10 in terms of how it has gone from almost zero to now an ecosystem that has over 30 plus design startups doing cutting edge work for next generation chips. We have a world major, a global major, setting the first important building block for manufacturing, which is the Micron plant, who's a global major in making memories and NAND chips that go into every data center and every mobile phone. And we have launched in the first year itself a deep academic curriculum for developing 85,000 PhDs, postdoctoral, masters in the whole material science, physics, chemistry space. And shortly we'll be announcing an India Semiconductor Research Center. So I think we are almost running like we have to run to make up lost ground. And the best evidence of this pace that we are progressing and the credibility is what I heard in the second Semicon India conference in Gandhinagar recently, which is that the question has moved between why India to why not India. And the Honorable Prime Minister said the same thing there as well in his speech, that every large semiconductor, small semiconductor company today attends Semicon India conference. Every brand.
Yeah.
And that in itself should tell us the deep interest that they have for India as a semiconductor.
Deep interest for certain. Are we likely to see any further announcements? Yeah. Is anything on the cusp, on the anvil?
Be confident. We will succeed.
Okay, let me ask you about a space that you've been personally deeply passionate and involved with, and that is online gaming. That's also been in the news for the wrong reasons. And now METI had put together a framework of really facilitating the evolution and the growth of the industry. Now with this 28% GST that's come in, industry believes that it's a death knell. It's a body blow. We've already started to see companies laying off people. Now the GST Council's decision is through. The amendment has been moved in Parliament as well. The government, though, has said that we will possibly review in 6 months if need be. Do you believe that this policy unpredictability as well as this 28% tax is going to be, in fact, as many are calling it, the death knell for the industry?
No, Shireen, first of all, it's not policy unpredictability as much as it is a new space totally. And there were no policies for it. And because there were no policies for it, there were a lot of bad actors that basically came in here and did things that were absolutely wrong and illegal and bad. I won't mention names, but there are companies that I know personally that have absolutely gamed the system and created such a credibility problem for the entire sector with their conduct and what they have done in terms of violating GST and taxation and so on. But be that as may, let me talk about where we are today and where we will go. I want to say this with absolute clarity. The Prime Minister, the government is committed to growing the online gaming sector. We think it's an important part of the digital economy goals we have, and we will certainly focus on encouraging the growth. We have created a framework today of rules that defines what is permissible online gaming. So we have basically said games that deal with addiction, that have user harm or involve wagering and betting are not permitted in India. So we have clarified that. Now, I have had discussions with the Honorable Finance Minister. We've explained where we are in terms of the progress of these regulations. And she is open for METI to go back once these self-regulatory bodies are notified, once there is some stability and predictability about what the online gaming sector will look like, for the matter to be considered. So I have requested that, and she's absolutely open, and the GST Council, I have spoken to Mr. Conrad Sangma as well, that this is what we are doing. We've kept them informed. So I think we should be optimistic. We should be absolutely, I don't think we should think of this as some death knell. This is certainly what happens when you venture into areas where there is no predictability, or not predictability, where there is no existing clear, transparent framework. So I think part of the problems today are that people have taken these risks, ventured in areas where there is no framework, and are, in a sense, waiting for the framework.
So are you suggesting then that this 6-month window that even the Finance Ministry has spoken of, they haven't committed to a reconsideration, but they said we'll see and review possibly in 6 months. Is it linked to the setting up of the SRBs?
No, I don't want to comment on what the Finance Minister or Finance Ministry has said. That is certainly beyond my pay scale to comment on that. But I certainly want to tell you and assure those through you, because you said death knell. So I certainly want to. I certainly
those were the
want
words
to,
used by industry.
Yeah,
not
I know,
mine.
I know.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm saying that I think nobody needs to look at this as a death knell. This is what is natural progression and evolution of a framework. We are working very hard to get this done. And I can assure you on behalf of the Government of India and METI that we will work very hard to communicate this new framework to those in the GST Council and the Finance Ministry that need to understand this.
You know, you've of course been a tech man. You've been a telecom man as well and a tech man. I don't know how many of you know, but you do still fly, do you?
Yeah, I mean, I fly, but Air India as a passenger.
So, how many hours have you clocked in the last few years?
No, I haven't flown for some years, because frankly, the little time that I get from the responsibilities that I have, I try and spend with my family, but I haven't flown for quite a while. But if you ask me how many hours have I clocked, I've clocked over 450 hours.
Over 450 hours. So what keeps you going as far as the, your sort of tech intervention is concerned, or your tech fix? What are you on several WhatsApp groups? I mean, what is your tech regimen?
Shireen, I'll explain to you, and I think this is important for people to understand. I actually think, and I'm like a grey-haired veteran of this space, and I've clocked over 35 years in the tech space, that this is certainly the most exciting time ever for India. If you're in the tech space as an investor, spectator, participant, employee, startup,
Minister,
it is the most exciting, and as a minister, it is such a privilege for me, and it's such a great high for me to engage with young startups who constantly blow my mind in terms of how creative they are, how far ahead they're thinking. I mean, I was at the G20 DIA yesterday, and I met startups who are working in bioinformatics, and they are looking at artificial intelligence as applied to the whole health space. And it is just amazing, the confidence and the creativity that is on display all around the country. And so it is an absolute privilege and pleasure to be where I am today. And I think I must have done some great karma in my past life to be able to get this opportunity.
Well, Rajiv Chandrasekhar, it's an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us here this evening. Ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
A big round of applause for the Minister who's made time specifically to join us here at the Digital India Vision 8.0. We truly appreciate it. Thank you so much, and we wish you the very best of luck. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Honorable Minister, for making time out for the grand culmination of Digital India Vision 8.0, despite your demanding schedule, and also for contributing towards India's digital landscape. Thank you so much, Shireen, for moderating the fireside chat. And now, ladies and gentlemen, moving on. If there is one area in India that has experienced profound transformation with digitalization, it is our financial landscape, with the emergence of payment gateways and lending solutions. As technology continues to advance at an unprecedented pace, it is crucial to anticipate and understand the future course of these dynamic sectors. We've gathered here distinguished industry experts and thought leaders who bring valuable insights on the evolving landscape of digital payments and lending in India. They will explore the opportunities, the challenges and potential disruptions it will bring during the next session, titled Digital Payments and Lending, The Future is Here. As we set the stage for the last panel discussion of this evening, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in inviting onto the stage the moderator for the session, Ritu Singh, Associate Editor and Anchor, CNBC TV18. And a very warm welcome to our distinguished panelists for this session. We would like to invite Kush Mehra, President and CBO, Pine Labs. Rohit Arora, CEO and co-founder, Biz2 Credit and Biz2X. Anjani Rathore, Chief Digital Officer, HDFC Bank. Mayank Kapoor, CTO, Rupi. and Kunal Kalavatia, Chief of Products, NPCI. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us this evening. Over to you, Ritu.
Well, thank you very much, and for setting that context, because we know what leaps and bounds we've grown in the last few years when it comes to digital payments, when it comes to digital lending. So, gentlemen, thank you very much for patiently standing by. This is the last panel, so we'll try to keep it very engaging for you all. And, let me start with the one representative that we have from the payment industry, Kunal from NPCI. Kunal, we're already clocking more than almost 9.5 billion transactions monthly on UPI. And NPCI's stated desire or target is to almost triple that, get to 1 billion transactions a day. Tell us what steps you're putting in place to get to that milestone.
Sure. I think thanks for the first question there. I think what we are trying to do is, with the landscape already set, I think like Minister Sir just said, I think the government has laid the infrastructure for the policy framework, the Digital India framework there. The regulator has very clearly put out the vision document that it plans for the next few years as what they see as what's coming in the payment space. So it's built a lot of, I'll say, predictability and stability for the industry to work. A very unique combination of banks and fintechs coming up together to create consumer solutions. So I think that combination is what's driving the digital payments growth for us. So that's in place. What we're looking at is, I think we're learning from what products and features are already in the market, how customers are using it. We're reaching out to customers, taking feedback from them on NPS, on MSAT, learning from them. What challenges are they facing in terms of learning a new product or a feature? What challenges they're facing while making a payment? We're looking at consumer complaints when they're writing back to us in terms of what challenges they faced. And we're creating new use cases there very clearly. In the recent monetary policy, Governor Sir announced 3 key, future-looking payment products, conversational payments, credit on UPI. I think this is very clearly setting up the stage for what we're going to be working for the future. So,
well, there's
1 billion is the task.
A monetary policy that goes by without some or the other UPI-related announcement. But Anjani, let me come to you. At HDFC Bank, you started promising instant loans in seconds years ago, right? I mean, we don't even have to visit branches anymore. And I'm talking about the ecosystem. What next in digital payments? Now that you've created this mammoth entity after your merger, you're talking about a digital transformation for the bank. You're talking about setting up a digital bank within HDFC Bank. So tell us what's going on there.
So our digital strategy for the bank is aligned to digital customers' expectations. And if we look at it, there are essentially at 2 different levels. One, a customer expects now the bank to be always on. It's not about few hours of banking. There are people who are taking automobile loans late at night. There are people who want personal loans. They are coming late at night. So the bank has to be always on, and it should be able to perform at scale. So more and more people are coming in, and the expectation is that I should get everything instant and in a seamless manner. I don't have to go anywhere. So in all banking products and services, essentially there are some key areas which are, if you can call it a friction item for digital. One of them is KYC, where we've seen enabling regulations come in, which is enabling KYC in a digital manner. Likewise, underwriting now with account aggregator and a lot of public information which is available, it's becoming simpler and easier to do that. And even on the collection side, when you lend, you have to collect as well. So there are mandates, UPI mandates, etc., which is coming up, which is making it easier. So on one side, there is an opportunity to reimagine how banking can be done. It's available 24/7. And on the other side, since it has to be always on, the huge amount of plumbing and the infrastructure which is running the bank has to be reinforced, and we need to ensure that it is able to perform at scale. So we have 2 different pronged strategies here.
This is something that HDFC Bank is doing. When you set up that digital bank within the bank, what are you trying to do there?
See, mostly today in the market, if you see anybody who's saying it's a digital bank, is essentially putting a very nice front end to the same infrastructure which is available with the banks.
Exactly, yes.
But that is semi-digital bank. It's not 100% digital bank. 100% digital bank will be a bank where both the core infrastructure and the front end, everything is digital native. It uses new technologies, new skills, new ways of working is needed to build that. So there is a difference between digitization and building a digital bank.
Well, Mayank, you come from Rupee, where you're looking at auto loans, for instance. Are you always on? How are you competing with Anjani in getting that car loan customer before he does?
Oh, Anjani and I are partners, and we work very closely together. But just like Anjani said, consumer, you have to start with the consumer. Always start with the consumer in mind. Consumers now are used to instant payments, instant experiences. They do not want to wait. So again, just like Anjani said, we are a fully digital bank. No paper forms to be signed. Rupee.com is part of the Kadekho group. And you really have to solve it from the consumer's point of view. Not just the front end, but the back end experience also has to be fully automated. And that's what we do at Rupee.com. Online, we use the India Stack, which the minister talked about, which is a great technology, by the way. I worked in Europe, I worked in the US. India Stack puts us leagues ahead of the rest of the world. That's why they're coming to get our India Stack. We use technologies like India Stack very heavily to onboard the customer seamlessly. With just a name and a mobile number, the customer is onboarded through India Stack. You upload your PAN and Aadhaar, and that's it. That's the only documentation you need to get approved for a loan. We have automated credit profiling engines running in the background, which take your KYC data, take your bureau data, and give you an instant offer. And once that offer is approved, payments are fully digital. So the payment hits your bank account or the used car dealer's bank account instantly as the loan is approved. This leverages a lot of technologies.
Now, every day there was a new circular from RBI, and the industry is really having these sleepless nights. 1 year down the line, are you sleeping any better?
For sure. I mean, I think a lot of initiatives that have been undertaken by the regulators, I feel that are very kind of futuristic in the sense that anything that we see that's come in the last few years and gives you a bit of a heartburn in the short term, we've lived through those journeys that 3 years out or 4 years out, we actually feel that intervention coming in few years ago, which also tells you the progressive mindset of the regulator in India, was the right step for one to have taken. I mean, I remember when we were back in 2012 or 13, that was a time that in India people could simply go just swipe a card and make a transaction, and you could swipe it on a billing system and the data can be skimmed and taken anywhere. The Indian regulator took a very hard call, and this is like October of 2013, saying that we give you a 6 months roadmap, everything has to move to chip and pin, and which meant that recarding all customers with chip cards, which meant developing POS systems, payment systems which have a chip reader, EMV reader, a little bit technical in that sense. And we thought that this is going to be a strain on the infrastructure. A lot of investment is going to go in. We went through that cycle. We did it for that 1 year. And I kid you not, today, thanks to that intervention back then, India actually went almost a decade ahead of many Western and global markets, with making sure that the risk and the fraud rates were probably the lowest in the world today. So I definitely feel that with a lot of tailwinds that also are coming in, there is an element of making sure that there is somebody who is also kind of leveling things up and balancing them, because in these times, distribution, expansion, and like my fellow panelists are talking, that today the fact that the journeys have become so much more digital, it's become super easy to distribute your products. Right? So when we started, we had to put a lot of boots on ground to go and sign merchants and shopkeepers. I mean, believe me, in today's world, a retailer who's sitting in one small market in the country, he doesn't want a physical interaction at all. You can distribute a product digitally, and you can actually push it through, a download link, and, you can have like 100,000 customers in no time. So I feel some level of regulatory framework that kind of tells you the right ways, to go about building businesses is the right intervention as well. So yeah, happy to be here.
Well, hundreds of thousands of customers in no time, Kush. I don't know what Pine Labs is doing, but Rohit, tell us about the MSME sector, though, the backbone of the economy. We're hearing about all of these innovations from all of the panelists. That remains to an extent, despite the regulatory push, despite the government push, somewhat ignored. What are you as a platform doing to bridge that financing gap? Is data able to do it? I mean, is the emerging tech able to effectively bridge the gap?
No, I think that's a very relevant question because government is trying to push the MSME sector, financing the credit gap that is there with account aggregation, Samity, that's going to open up a lot of data points. And today, RBI also made an announcement about, launching a digital platform for lending in the MSME space and home loans, but mostly in the MSME. My experience is, see, we run a global business, we're headquartered out of US. We do a lot of the SME lending there across global markets. In India, we provide with the platform technology. I think there are 2 or 3 things which still need to go to the next level. I think the data availability has got better, than what it was. I think the overall ability to lend money through digital channels, especially smaller loans, is getting better, but still cash flow based lending models are still not very strong, here. And I think there's a lot of opportunity now with account aggregation, Samity, and other data points getting opened up, because that you cannot use just your historical data. You need to use data in real time, and then you need to have the connectivity of that data on an ongoing basis. And then the third piece, as Anjani also rightly said, when you lend money, you need to get money back. So your collections mechanisms have to be more well-defined. And especially, I think that's more of a legal reform issue in the country than digital reform. I think digitally, India is really world-class right now. But I think from a legal perspective, there are still things to be done which can improve that ability for lenders to get their money back if they're lending everything totally digitally today.
Well, actually, Anjali, let me ask you that. Legally, what we most recently heard is the Digital Data Privacy Bill, which is now in act, of course. What will that mean in terms of, responsibilities and compliance? Will it make banks, financial institutions that possess a lot of data, process a lot of data, be significant data fiduciaries? How do you understand the impact of that act on the financial ecosystem?
Well, banking is about trust. It's a lot about trust. So, we are supposed to protect money for the citizens, and at the same time now it's about also protecting data, because data is a big asset in the digital world. It will, of course, the new regulation is going to ensure that at least the large processors of data and fiduciaries, they are taking the right kind of safeguard to handle data. And if you look at it, the top 3 sectors would be financial services, telecom, and commerce, where a lot of data is flowing. And all of them will have to take certain measures to ensure that it is always safe and protected in a digital world which is zero trust architecture. So we will have to ensure that all the measures are put in place. A lot of it is already there in different forms, so it will also depend on interpretation of how various organizations interpret it. But there will be a round of clarifications, and I'm sure that there will be a level of standardization which will come in as well.
Okay.
Can I add to that?
Yes, sure, go for it.
So I think this Digital Data Protection Act is a big boon for consumers overall. The trend I see that is happening in India is a lot of consent-driven workflows for consumers. You've seen that with the account aggregator, and just for the benefit of the audience, account aggregator is relatively new. It's a framework where you can consent to sharing your data. We are using it at Rupee at Kardeko, where when we want to underwrite a loan, we ask for consent to access your banking information. And you have the power to approve or deny that consent request, real time. Account aggregator started with banking information. It will add insurance information. It will add investment and mutual funds as well. So I see a massive trend empowering the consumer to share their data with only relevant parties. And the government is putting in a framework for that data sharing on consent. I think this is a big boon for Indian consumers. Very few countries in the world have this. I think we are lucky to have a consent-driven workflow to sharing your data and only with the right parties and for a defined time period. I think it's a great deal for Indian consumers.
Well, it's a very new act, so we'll see how that evolves and what sort of compliance burden that puts on the financial ecosystem. Of course, it is for the larger good that, it is with our consent that our data is going to be used. But, Kunal, coming back to the payment landscape, you can't really talk about payments globally in the world without talking about UPI. But, what next? How do you get, you've launched UPI Lite, 123 Pay, so on and so forth. How are you making sure that payment gets to the last mile customer beyond the tier 1, tier 2, maybe even beyond the tier 3 cities?
I think there's some product feature of UPI which is already in play. Last year, the respectable governor launched something called 123 Pay, which is where a customer who is using a feature phone dials a number is making a payment. And I think that's steadily and very strongly growing. And we've learned from that execution. We've learned that customers they're literate. They can speak, understand numbers. They can speak their native language. And they're comfortable talking to someone. So I think if you can use this learnings to another payment tool, I think that would help. And I think we're seeing that the recent announcement is possibly nudging or hinting towards what could be called as conversational payments, and that there is a certain direction that we have to work on. But I think it came from the execution of 123 Pay, which was meant for customers with feature phones who could use UPI. We see now a lot of phones coming up with a camera where it can scan a QR. So that's opening another opportunity for thinking and deliberating along with banks and fintechs to find solutions for that. So we're working on very clearly what kind of phones, what kind of softwares are available with consumers right now. Can that be used? Can we use conversational payments to do something there? So there is work on that area, but I think, I think from the last session we learned, I think that we'll have to wait and see for some time.
We've heard of all of this from the Reserve Bank of India often, but Kunal, before you put the mic down, UPI has been a disruptor of sorts, right? And NPCI surely doesn't want to remain a one-hit wonder. What next in payments, if you could give us any clue?
I think, again, I'll take inspiration from how Minister Sir managed it. I think we're not doing any breaking news here. But I think what we are possibly following as a principle is, we're looking at customers using the current set of products. Broadly, we have customers divided into 3 segments of products. Customers using the mobile phone to make payments. Customers using an assisted tool like a card to make payments. Customers using possibly who don't have access to a smartphone or don't have access to even a feature phone, even to a card sometimes, making payments through biometric as a tool. We are studying all these segments, and I think this covers a fair constituent of the citizens of the country. We are understanding how customers are interacting with each of these technologies, what pains they go through, what possibly excites them also is important. And then we are building more solutions around it. Like, I think I'll take an example of UPI. UPI was used for P2P payments when it really started. Opening up a lot of merchant use cases for it is where we took a drive. We built a lot of market enablement around it that grew the P2M space very fast. Now, I think in the process, we figured out customers wanted to use UPI for IPO investments. So we brought out a feature of one-time mandate and block around it. I think it's about now hearing from the consumer, working on their problem statements or what they're liking, and then seeing the tech feasibility around it, building up the new, going back to the marketing, saying, whether the market is able to create a sustainable proposition for itself, and then rolling it out.
Anjali, this growth in UPI that Kunal's been telling us about, do you think some of it is coming at the expense of banking products like debit cards, for instance? If you look at RBI's annual report, there's been a decline of almost 30% in spends in the last year or so. What do you think is the future of some of these products with payment systems expanding the way they are?
See, UPI is growing really fast. And it's not right to compare that kind of growth along with the other payment instruments that we have. But as a bank, we do more than 1 billion transactions in a month. And it is spread across multiple form factors and, in debit card, credit card, UPI, NEFT, RTGS, everything put together. And each of them is growing really fast. Some of them at times do taper off, but it's also a function of form factor which is getting used. For example, credit on debit card. Now, these are the kind of form factors which are available but haven't taken off in this country yet.
Credit on UPI
So
as
when
well.
credit on UPI comes, that becomes a form factor to take that to a whole new level. So these are simple, seamless experiences which will extend the reach of credit across the country, and the growth will be phenomenal. We have not yet seen the tip of the iceberg yet. It's going to grow.
Let's hope it continues to expand the pie. Yes, Kunal.
I think just to add to what Anjani just said, it's the environment that the government has created. There's this vision and the policy making process that the RBI is really laying it out. And it's the partnership with the banks and the fintechs which are really driving it. So if you ask me, I think any single entity taking credit for it, I think it would not be right. So if you ask me, it's actually a multiplier effect, right? So I think what we're seeing on UPI is actually bringing together of all these four elements together, working for it. So, and I think the fifth one is obviously the customer acceptance. Without the consumer acceptance, this magic would not have happened. So if you ask me, this is like a force multiplier there.
Well, surely there are multiple stakeholders, and I'm glad you brought up RBI because I quickly wanted to touch upon the regulatory aspect as well. Kush, in the last 1 year, digital lending guidelines have been the big change for the industry, which has largely remained unregulated up until now. But it comes with stringent guardrails. How has life changed? Is it better? Is it worse? Are there changes you wish that weren't made or should be made?
I think for a very long time, there was a need for a level of moderation, to come into this space of, in the space of lending. Just as you see when it comes to lending to, to consumers through the banks channels, the traditional world, there are very clearly set out, regulations and guidelines based on which, these large credit card, issuance has happened in the country. What was missing, we feel, is that while there are a lot of new incumbents in the ecosystem who are coming as fintechs, as platforms, working as fintechs, but working along with NBFCs and lenders, but at the end of the day, most of those models were building scale. Most of those models would build a significantly large lending book. And in that process, if you really ask me, the lender on record, which is supposed to be, the financial entity, which could be an NBFC or a bank, had, in that sense, a very little, role to play, right? Because if I'm really building out a model where I say, okay, this is like an FLDG model and you know how it operates, then if I'm guaranteeing, first loss on every transaction that, every loan that I'm onboarding, the larger providers of credit, which are the banks and NBFCs, in that sense were not really in the flow of lending there because somebody's come in and taken that over and I don't really participate, as a lender. So by that now coming in, what's going to happen is that obviously there's going to be more governance. Obviously there are going to be, in that sense, more, more control in the way how you build a credit book, right? It will have a co-ownership and a skin in the game from the lender, which could be a bank and an NBFC and the fintech platform. So definitely it may I feel, taper off a little bit in terms of the breakneck speed at which, loan books were built. And we've also been through a cycle, right? And if you actually see in the last, 2 or 3 years, there's been a significant consolidation also that you've seen because, a cycle will run, right? The credit cycle will run, right? So I think that bit of moderation in the long term is a great move for the country.
But Mayank, do you agree we'll see a bit of a slowdown in this frantic pace of growth that we've seen among the fintechs? The first loss default guarantee was a great leg on which it was growing. Now it's been capped at 5%, for instance, among other guardrails. What will that mean?
It will definitely slow down some fintechs. Just again to explain, first loss default guarantee is a tool that is used by fintechs to lower their cost of capital and do co-lending with other banks. Now the regulations state that you can only have 5% of your loan portfolio in FLDG models. So that means the fintech, in order to grow, can only grow with a certain bank to 5%. It definitely slows down the overall growth of this sector. But again, we have to understand why this is being done. In the end, it is to protect consumer interests. So it is being done to make sure consumers are safe and the amounts are not being loaned out to unsecured, bad credit risk consumers. The checks and balances are in place. What I would wish as a fintech is we at least have maybe a heads up on these regulations sometimes. We all wish that. And maybe we have a long-term view on where the regulations are headed for us to plan better. But overall, I think I still believe this is being done for the consumer, the right thing for the consumer, and fintechs will adapt. And this sector is a great sector to be in, and it's growing really fast. So I'm very bullish on this sector.
We're running out of time, so Rohit, you have the final word.
Yeah.
I know you want to come in on the FLDG bit, but also if you could leave us with a thought of what next in digital lending. That's what we're here to talk about. You know, whether it's the open credit enabled network that's changing the industry, the account aggregator, the India stack story, or do you think there's another trend that'll emerge that'll completely reshape how we see lending today?
So I think the account aggregation and all that is great, but I think we have so if I look globally what's happening in US and other markets, we have to move away just from banks providing credit. I think in India, the big challenge is NBFCs, their cost of capital is extremely high compared to banks. And what is happening in US right now is very interesting. We are seeing more and more movement towards private credit. So today, like in US, in the SME space, 45% of lending is happening through insurance companies and pension funds, not through banks. And what banks always thought that, low-cost deposits is their permanent capital, and that's not true anymore. So what's going to happen as India gets more digital, and if India can reform its capital markets, a lot of banks will actually get disintermediated also, because banks thought always in US that, just taking in low-cost money, they will always keep. Now in US, the big reason why we are seeing run on banks is because it's all digital. You can move your money to treasuries and money market funds in a jiffy. So I think that's going to happen in a country like India also, because as consumers become smarter, as consumers start thinking about, where they can get the best return and the best experience, as the insurance sector is growing in India and we see more savings and more pools of capital coming in, we'll see that same thing happening here. And one radical idea we have discussed with RBI at great length is allowing digital-only banks. Digital-only banks which have deep pools of capital coming in globally. And they should have an ability to securitize their, loans and other products that they do in the secondary markets in a very transparent manner. Because if India allows that, the amount of credit and the credit at cost, very cheap cost will become extremely instantaneously available. And I think in a country of India's size and economy, we have very few good banks today, and we cannot just only depend on banks to get access to credit, get access to other, products out there.
Well, I'm very tempted to ask you, Anjani, because we have to wrap, but quickly, respond to what he said. We can't just depend on banks. I mean, are you going to get in a cage fight for the fintech for this?
See, the good thing is that Digital India is about democratizing organizations, entities, ideas. So it's going to be experience-led growth in the future. Whosoever gives the better experience is going to grow faster and better. There will always be two schools of thoughts. I think it's not right to debate who's going to win, who's going to not, because
so no cage fights here.
That just pushes the envelope of financial inclusion. But I think it'll be about experience-led growth, and the best experience is going to win in future.
Well, may the best man win. On that note, thank you very much for being a wonderful panel, Kunal, Anjani, Rohit, Kush, as well as Mayank, and thank you all for being a wonderful audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you to all the panelists for such an engaging session, and thank you, Ritu, for moderating it so well. Ladies and gentlemen, moving forward, it's time for us to draw curtains onto CNBC TV18 Digital India Vision 8.0 in partnership with Google Workspace. But before I sign off, let me take this opportunity to remind you that News 18 Network will always be at the forefront of covering everything, all news, and bringing to you about India's digital growth story. The inspiring tales that they are, the conversations with key stakeholders, and all the information about this digital revolution that we are all part of today. A big thank you to all the speakers who joined us on this platform and spent their time with us. A big thank you to all of you in the audience for sharing your evening with us. And a very big thank you to our partner, Google Workspace, for its incredible support for this very, very special initiative. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This is Ritika signing off. Please don't forget to join us for dinner. Thank you.